call the roll.
Mayor Silver?
Here.
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 Commissioner Randall?
Here.
Commissioner Lewis?
Here.
All present?
Next is agenda approval. If there are any items that do not meet the approval for being heard on this evening's agenda, now is the time to remove those items. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda as given.
Mayor. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'd like to move to approve tonight's agenda as given.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Next is, let's see, approval of consent agenda. Items placed on the consent agenda will be voted upon with one motion. If any item proposed does not meet the approval of all commissioners, a commissioner may request that the item be heard under items from consent agenda. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda as given.
Mayor, I make a motion to approve this evening's consent agenda as given.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We are down to item 7, presentations. Hopefully that's what a lot of us are here for tonight. The Aztec sparkles, lighting lights from this past holiday season. Ed, thank you.
Yes, Mayor, Commissioners, we're here to recognize the winners from the weekly online voting and also the winners that each of you commissioners picked for your own districts. For those of you who are winners, as I call out your name or your address, would you come up and we'll give you your plaque? So I will start with week 1. The commercial winner was Aztec Feed and Supply. And the residential winner and the residential winner was 1011 Rio Hondo Road. I think it's the X family. For week 2, the commercial winner was Soaps on Main.
Oh, man.
And the residential winner was 407 Highland Road, Charles Doby. For week 3, the commercial winner was Cara Drug. I think they're here. And then for the residential winner, it was 905 Mountain View Drive, the Road family. I think it's not. For week 4, the commercial winner was Ruins Road RV Park. Guess not. And then for the residential winner, it was 706 French Drive. King George.
You check them overtime hours.
Okay, for the commission district winners, for District 1, the winner was 908 Mountain View. I don't recall seeing them. For District 2, the winner selected was 1140 Graceland Drive. And then for winner 3, the winner selected was 400 North Rio Grande Avenue. And no one from there. And for District 4, the selection was 500 Western Circle. And then for District 5, it was 3,112 Hately Court. I guess there's no one here for the...
They got notices, right?
Huh?
They got notices.
Yes, sir, I delivered them, hand-delivered them. Actually, 2 of them said they weren't going to be able to attend, so, and then another one said they maybe, and then one of the houses, that there was no one there at the time of the delivery.
Hammer's gonna come down.
So,
Well, Mr. Curtis, thank you for leading us again and for kind of coordinating all this, all the winners. Was there any little rivalry between the soap shop and the feed shop? Congratulations, everybody, and thanks for participating. I think downtown, especially this year, looked really, really good. Credit to all the businesses that put lights out, and credit to the electric department for putting our new lights up and the trees and everything. It was really cool. Still looks great, you know. So thanks again, everybody, and congratulations.
And Mayor, just I'd like
Yes,
to say
ma'am.
too, just for driving around, and even all the residents, even if you didn't win, but driving around the city was, it looked so, it was beautiful. It was just a fun time to drive around and look at all the cool lights and the decorations all over town. So good job, everybody.
Well, next year y'all can have these plaques
Really local.
That's a good point. Okay, so next thing we have is citizens input. Is there anybody that signed up for citizens input? Okay, so it looks like we have a couple of folks that are signed up. Does that mean those folks crossed their name off, the red mark, I'm going to assume? Oh, I see, okay. All right, we have, first up is Joshua Lynch.
I just wanted to say,
Did I say that?
I'm with the
Not reading very well.
Aztec Chamber of Commerce, Vice President Sandy Waver's the President of the Aztec Chamber. We just want to let everybody know that we're going to have a candidate forum for the upcoming elections on February 18th at 6 p.m. at the Senior Center. So we are going to ask for community input on the questions. So anybody is welcome to email us at director@aztecchamber.com with any questions you might want to ask. We'll pick probably around 10 or 10 questions to ask during the event to all different nominees or
The candidates, yeah.
So we just want to let everybody know that we're going to be doing that. And the Aztec Chamber's in full swing again, so if you have any questions about anything going on or want to get more involved with the Aztec Chamber, talk to myself or Sandy or shoot us an email.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Next is Gail Aspromonte. Did I pronounce that right?
She used to be a mayor.
I just would like to, voice some concerns. I'm a former commissioner and a former mayor for 8 years, and I sat in your position for 8 years and never, ever, ever got the philosophy of Aztec and businesses. My personal opinion is I'm fixing to put another small business in Aztec. I've had 3 of them. And if you think it's easy to do a business in Aztec, try it. Put your money where your mouth is and try it. It's hard. You don't just fight the city of Aztec, you fight having a sign in front of your business. And my personal opinion is it's time for the city commission to go to your planning and zoning and ask them to rework all their stuff. You cannot do business without a sign. Everybody here on Main Street pays their taxes, everybody in Aztec Boulevard pays their taxes, and we pay a lot to live in the city of Aztec. And I have some real concerns. I'm here to voice my approval of the little church that's in the little mall area that wants to continue to do their church business. They were on Main Street, they weren't bothering anybody, they didn't take up any parking. They meet on Sunday, one time on Sunday when nobody's here in Aztec. I understand they've been told they will have to move. I don't know what the circumstances are, but as a former mayor, I never understood the philosophy of business in Aztec. If you're going to run a city and you're going to run it on gross receipts, you need businesses. So it's the city's business to get out of their way and let them do business. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. All right, folks, we are moving on to business items. Business item A is the letter of support for grant application for carbon capture for San Juan Generating Station. Mr. Mueller?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor and Commission. New Mexico Tech University and Enchant Energy are planning to be co-applicants on a U.S. Department of Energy grant application, and they are requesting from the Commission a letter of support for that grant application. Dr. Robert Balch and Raven Goshwick are here tonight to make a short presentation on the grant itself and answer any questions that U.S. Commission might have.
Is this thing on? All right. Mayor Snowburn, members of the commission, first of all, thanks for having us up here today. I know it's not a usual item to see on your agenda. I'd like to very briefly cover what the application is trying to get from the federal government. But I also have 15 years' experience in carbon capture and storage, and have been working in the state of New Mexico nationally and internationally for the last 10 years on the regulations that allow this to be done safely. So I stand for any question that you have about how this process would actually work if it's adopted. That's the name of the proposal. Carbon Safe is a U.S. Department of Energy program. It's to fund large-scale meaning commercial and commercially funded through industry practices, carbon storage projects, and this is to combat climate change. So Carbon Safe, as I mentioned, is that. We're jumping in to this at phase 3. They've already had 2 phases in this program, and they've given out more than $200 million. This money is going to states like Wyoming, Illinois, Ohio, and Alabama in the southeast right now. I'd like to bring some to New Mexico. We previously had a Carbon Safe 1 application in Utah as well. What we do for this is you identify and characterize an appropriate reservoir that you can store the CO2 in. Capture occurs at the coal plant, and you can capture enough of that carbon dioxide that you meet the zero or low emission standards for the state of New Mexico. And you're putting on the order of 6 million tons of CO2 into the ground that you would otherwise put into the atmosphere. So to do this, you have to understand the geology, you have to understand the reservoir characteristics, you have to have enough information from those rocks that you can make a decision and do modeling that shows that it can be done safely before the project can advance. And that's what New Mexico Tech is working on, hopefully for the benefit of Enchant, but also to keep some 1,700 jobs in the Four Corners area. So what we're here today to really talk about is something that would be fairly local to Aztec, and that's the characterization well. We want to drill a well to about 9,000 foot. That's into the Entrada and Morrison formations. You have large saltwater aquifers. Saltwater has a great carrying capacity for carbon dioxide. That well would be studied and logged in every possible tool that's available. We would also collect core and do laboratory experiments to make sure that the fluids in the reservoir and the rock itself has the capacity to store that amount of CO2. This is the area of interest. We have support from landowners and surface owners and mineral right holders in this area. The well that we're drilling would be primarily for characterization. If the overall project, if Enchant is successful and puts carbon capture onto the San Juan plant, the injection well would not be, it would be closer to the plant. This would turn into a monitoring well where you keep track of where the CO2 is moving in the subsurface. This is just a cross-section of the San Juan Basin. I'm sure many of you have seen something like this before. The formations are very deep. They're below any producing horizons. And one of the things that we do in this type of study is we also verify that the rocks that are sealing that unit have the capacity to keep CO2 from moving out of the formation you put it into. Our list of collaborating partners on this, of course, New Mexico Tech. Enchant Energy is the company that you may have heard of that's trying to put carbon capture on the San Juan plant. University of Utah, Los Alamos National Labs, Sandia National Labs, and we have support from surface owner Hillcorp and a lot of support from Schlumberger Carbon Services. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, so what you're asking, and I kind of know the answer to some of these, but it's more for context and for the folks that are present tonight, here and in the crowd, of course, is for the feasibility study, correct?
Yes.
It's just a letter of support that some of the other local communities have also signed to support your grant application in the amount of, if you wouldn't mind stating that amount? How much is the grant
okay,
for?
Sure. So first of all, yes, we do have support from Bloomfield, Farmington,
The county and, right.
and we'll have a letter tomorrow from Four Corners Economic Development as well. The grant, the federal part of the grant is $20 million. for this part of the study. If this part of the study is successful, there would be another $50 to $100 million that would come in later on that would support the monitoring and additional characterization that you do while the CO2 is being injected. So, yes.
And that's taxpayer funded, correct?
That's federal taxpayer dollars.
Right.
The other part of that is a matching fund. That's $5 million, and that comes from a combination of industry partners and also from New Mexico Tech ourselves, so that's partly state funds.
Okay.
That's a question.
No, go ahead.
What timeline, period of time is this process
So this is
going to
about
take?
3 years, around 3 years to do
Okay,
a
I saw a
characterization study.
timeline that said 3 years, and
Yeah.
I just wondered it. So,
It's actually, it needs to be done faster than that in some ways because the business model that Enchant has relies on what they call a 45Q tax credit. That's a $50 a ton of CO2 tax credit that you can get from the U.S. government, but you have to have your project started before the end of 2021 to be eligible for that. So it's really 2 years from now. We hope to have the majority of this work done.
how many people will
I'm sorry.
you employ in this process?
So New Mexico Tech, we've been working with carbon storage for about 16 years. We have an organization called the Southwest Partnership on Carbon Sequestration, and that's 7 western states and about 50 individuals across a number of institutions there. At New Mexico Tech, we have 22 people that are full-time that are working in my research center, and then we have another 30 to 40 students at a given time that are working on projects that are related to this type of work. I think that if they put carbon capture onto the plant, as well as saving those existing mining jobs and the plant jobs, you also would add about 50 to 100 people that are going to do monitoring and operation of the Mitsubishi carbon capture unit. And then also, there would be a continuing employment in the state of New Mexico, particularly from New Mexico Tech trained students and New Mexico University and National Lab personnel that are doing the monitoring. So altogether, you're talking around 100 people, I would guess.
Okay.
It's kind of a long-winded answer, sorry about that.
And this, and I don't know the answer to this, I've heard anecdotal stuff, and I know you don't maybe know, I don't expect you to be an expert on every single aspect of this, unless maybe you are. But I guess my question is, isn't this, am I right in saying that this will be the largest carbon capture project of its kind, really, in North America, right, ever?
So I'm a big advocate for this kind of technology. If you're serious about things like the Paris Accord and the limits that they think that you should put on CO2 that's going into the atmosphere, you have to employ geologic storage in the short term. And in the long term, if you want to go carbon negative, that is capture CO2 from the atmosphere and reduce our carbon levels to below previously to what they were previously to the Industrial Revolution, you have to also use carbon storage in geologic formation. So this is a critical technology. This is something that the world's been playing with for a long time. Most of the time they try and tell you that there will be a penalty, a carbon tax, something like that. They hit you with a stick. And nations have not been able to do this. It costs $100 to $120 per ton for them to do this, and it would break their economy. The U.S. has taken a different approach using these 45Q tax credits. Companies are voluntarily doing this. You can store the CO2 in depleted oil reservoirs, make a little bit of incremental oil, and that offsets the cost. There's one other operating power plant in the world that takes CO2 from a coal plant and puts it into geologic storage. That's in Parrish, outside of Houston. They put their CO2 into enhanced oil recovery projects in the east side of Texas. They would be smaller than this one, so this would be the largest.
Right.
Now, I do want to make sure that it's understood that this is really proven technology, the capture side. The real challenge is just making sure you find a good place to store it, and especially if you can find it local to the plant, you can reduce the expense and make it economical for a company to do it voluntarily.
So kind of just to piggyback off that, I mean, the PRRC and New Mexico Tech, I'm assuming you guys have done some extensive research and located, that location that you showed earlier would probably be your preferable location and your preferable zone?
Yeah, so also at New Mexico Tech is the New Mexico Bureau of Geology. Dr. Dana Scholl there has been studying the saline aquifers in the San Juan Basin for a few years. So we really jumped off from a very good starting point in identifying this. So in the last 2 months, we've done all the preliminary modeling. We would put the CO2 in at one point, and we expect the CO2 to spread out and migrate a little bit up depth. That's why we're locating the monitoring well where we want to put it, and that's so that we can identify when the CO2 gets there and at what concentration.
I think it's awesome.
Yeah, me too.
But I mean, I think it's important to get, the opportunity to maybe do the feasibility study. But I mean, I think it's fair to say that there are still quite a few unanswered questions moving forward, as far as with the big one being cost, which I think is one of the biggest reasons why there aren't more folks in the country doing that. It's just cost prohibitive in a lot of cases. I come from West Virginia, where they've been talking about clean coal since the early 90s.
Right.
It may be sooner, I don't know. I moved there in 95, so it's been something I've heard since most of my adult life until I moved here. So I don't doubt that the technology exists. It's just, scaling it and moving the timeline, That plant's due to close in 2022, and we're already, even in a best-case scenario, and again, I support doing the study, it doesn't hurt to check and see if it's viable. But I think there's a lot of questions moving forward as far as the overall viability, not because the technology isn't sound, but because of all the moving parts and the costs and the time frame that we're looking at. Because even according to what you just said a few minutes ago, in a perfect world, for this to work out for Enchant Energy and for the 1,700 jobs approximately, it would have to happen at an unprecedented speed than it's ever happened before. On the largest project that's ever been done, I think the Texas plant is maybe half or a quarter of the size.
It's about a third.
And
it was done
one in
about,
Canada is about that.
about 3 years. The
Yeah.
Weyburn project is about a third to a half the size. The nice thing about this carbon safe program and the Department of Energy, they've been pumping money into this for around 20 years. And this last year and this next year and the year after that, especially because of the 45Q tax credit and its deadline, there's going to be another dozen or 2 dozen projects like this going on around the country. It won't always be a coal plant. And for example, in the Illinois Basin, it's a very large-scale ethanol plant. In the Wyoming case, you're looking at gas separator plants from oil and gas production. But these things, they have to be shown to the world that they can work. And the U.S., we can afford to do it. But China, India, the places that are really burning the coal, that are producing 80% of the CO2 emissions right now, the U.S. is only making 20%. What we do is one impact, but the best thing we can do is provide the example. And there's a lot of will at the federal level to see this done, and I think we're trying to generate that in the state of New Mexico. And I think you always see these lists where New Mexico's last or second to last. Why can't we be first on something? Why can't we be first on something really big? And I think this is an opportunity that we really have to pursue.
I'm into that.
Anybody have any questions?
I think it's exciting, and I'm crossing my fingers that it all works and that we can, keep those jobs here, so.
We have the experience. We've already injected around 1.4 million tons into an EOR project in North Texas as part of our federal funding on another grant. These things can happen. When industry gets its mind set on something and it's economic, they'll make it happen in the time that it needs to be done.
But in your proposal, though, and I just want to, and again, we need to go ahead and, I think we can, I don't know if anybody else, but the study, you're anticipating it taking 3 years.
So
On paper right now, the proposal you have is that it's going to take 3 years.
But that doesn't mean that Enchant would be held up for 3 years waiting for it to be done. That they would have data early on that would tell them where they want to be drilling their injection well and getting ready. Now, the 2-year deadline, there's really 2 components to it. The 2-year deadline for the 45Q means you have to start the project. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be running, but it has to be in some stage of development. The bigger challenge is meeting the 2022 deadline for the plant closure. That needs to be, acted on at the state level by the governor and probably the legislature and the regulatory bodies like the State Land Office, places like the BLM, which are not necessarily in New Mexico's control, and then also like the OCD. So that's just permits and its applications. And these are things that we've done. New Mexico, believe it or not, is actually a leader in carbon storage. We have acid gas disposal wells that put a mixture of CO2 and H2S into the ground in southeast New Mexico, 10 of them, totaling about 3 million tons a year. I would say between that and the EOR that's been happening in the state for the last 40 years, New Mexico has probably stored more carbon than anybody else in the entire world. We're a leader, we have the technology, we have the ability to make this happen, just the will to do it.
So I was going to say, is there any indication from what you've dealt with the state agencies as far as where they are? Because I mean, and again, I'm not a policy expert on all this stuff, but the things like the Energy Transition Act just passed really a year ago for all intents and purposes, which was meant to partially deal with this very thing. And I mean, it seems like the state would have to basically say, well, we're not going to do that now. We're going to play this out and, try and keep this plant open for the extended period of time beyond 2022 just to get the study done and to start making some moves, not to mention the issues with the jobs and their transition. I mean, I know if I was kind of crossing my fingers and it was either, I could literally be out of a job within a certain short period of time, I don't know that I'm going to wait and hope that this is going to come through. And if it does, there's always going to, just construction in general, delays and things like that. So, I mean, I know we don't have the answers to all those questions. These are just questions just kind of off the top of my head, and I think moving forward after we kind of do the feasibility study letter of support, which at the end of the day is all it is a letter of support for a study.
Sure.
But just, questions that are definitely hanging out there that I think we need to be asking and expecting answers from the folks that are coming in front of us. Not necessarily you, I don't mean that in a negative way, but just the folks that are pushing this project and all the stakeholders to be transparent and upfront as we move forward and be real with the folks who it's actually going to affect at the end of the day, or the folks that are working at that place right now.
So the Department of Energy has doubled down on their original partnership program. They did 7 of these big-scale demonstration projects starting in 2003. We have a new project funded from them, $5 million for the next 3 years to identify and fast-track commercialization of carbon storage projects in 13 western states. We basically have everything New Mexico and west. It's called the Carbon Utilization and Storage Partnership of the Western United States. So we have a mission from them to do this. Part of that, and when I first started talking to Enchant about this, I said, your big problem is not in the technology. It's not in the ability of a storage site to be developed. It's in public perception, and ultimately it's in the will of the state of New Mexico to pursue this. The governor's gone on record, I'm not going to speak for the governor, but she's gone on record saying that this would fit into her 2040 carbon initiative. Energy Secretary Probst, on 2 occasions I've had a chance to speak with her. They're supportive of this as long as the technology is proven and it's safe. It can be done. I think that we have a good chance for this, but our real mission, I think, is to get out in front of people, inform them about what this is and how it can be a benefit, not just locally, but also nationally and internationally, and then not have to try and defend ourselves after the fact. I mean, be in front, give a lot of information, and that's our best bet. But we have engaged the agencies and the operators at the highest level in the state, and continue to do so.
All right. Thanks, sir. We have any other questions or comments? We can open this up quickly for discussion. If we don't have any other questions, thank you, sir.
Thank you very
Ross,
much.
did you have one?
No, I was just,
Okay. All right. Any discussion? Any?
yeah, I requested some minor changes in the letter, and I'll give everybody a copy of,
Still another one? One more?
One more, yeah. Okay.
Good now.
Everybody? I'm sorry.
I'll go over just these changes that I recommended,
Excuse me.
and they don't change the context of and purpose of the letter. It's just some things that I thought improved the understanding and of the letter. And the first thing I did was on the very first line, I took away enthusiastic support and just put support to be more objective, because that's just the way I was taught to write these kind of letters that I was doing when I was a grant writer. And then the second, in paragraph 2, the last sentence, the sentence was simplified, describing the county population. And in the final paragraph, a sentence was adjusted to reflect support for the efforts of Enchant Energy and New Mexico Tech to investigate CO2 storage and determine the feasibility and safety of the proposed project, just simplifying a complex sentence. Then we discussed an addition that if funds are granted by the DOE for this project, the Aztec City Commission requests a quarterly report on the progress of the project. And I think, as we've just gone over this, that it would be very important for our citizens to be aware of this major project. This is a lot of money and a very significant feasibility study. And then the very last was, while the City of Aztec is not offering any financial support for the project at this time, we are committed to helping the proposers obtain information and data that might be needed as the project goes forward. So those were the changes that I was recommending in the letter.
So if I understand right, based on the original letter, this letter just kind of narrows the focus to the actual feasibility study specifically, which is what we're dealing with tonight.
Right.
And we're not enthusiastic.
Some may
I
be
am.
But to use that term in a letter, assuming that everybody's enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So where did the original letter come from, I guess is my question. Is it just the draft letter that was?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a draft that Mike Stark forwarded on to me.
Okay, I was curious.
And that was the last, and correct me if I'm wrong, the last little blurb about the financial support is something we kind of took off of the county's letter, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And to be clear, we're not all enthusiastic about it. We're just-
It's typical for a grant writer to write these. I've written several to the City of Aztec for requesting funds. And so I wrote a lot of these when I was writing grants for 15 years. And so it's a draft, and nearly everybody just signs and doesn't even read them. But I read it.
Okay. So how do we have to do that?
So, I was just gonna ask our city attorney if, I mean, it doesn't change anything in, so you're okay with everything that's.
As long as you guys are approving or happy with the stylistic changes, I just believe they're all stylistic changes.
Right.
It's
It's
just, it
no
doesn't affect the
content.
context at all.
Right.
Right.
Just wanted to make
It's
sure
no
you were on
content
board with us.
I'm on board, Miss Site, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, a quick comment. I think there's been some misperceptions about what this letter of support was about, what the other entities supporting it was about. So I kind of think this will help put to bed some of those concerns. It's for a study to find out what's feasible, and we have technology, let's go and see what it works, basically. So I think it'll put a lot of people's minds at rest, I hope.
Okay.
And if I could just say one thing, I used to actually work at the PRRC when the Southwest project for carbon sequestration came out. And I will say that New Mexico Tech, bar none, is probably one of the leaders in the country actually doing this work. And if Mr. Balch says the technology works, I would probably bet money on it, just because of the knowledge and the know-how and the time that they put down in there at the Recovery Research Center. I mean, they do good work.
Okay. Okay. Is there a way we need to reword this motion to include the amended letter of
I think
support?
so. That'll cover it, won't
Okay.
it, Carla?
All right. So we'll go ahead and close discussion on this and entertain a motion on business item A.
Mr. Mayor, oh,
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am?
I move to approve the amended letter of support for Carbon Safe Grant application.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Carl, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Snyder,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Fry,
Aye.
Commissioner Slack,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis,
Aye.
Commissioner Randall,
Aye.
motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you, and thank you.
If I may make one last request.
Yes, sir.
We're turning this grant poll tomorrow afternoon.
Right, yeah, we need some time sensitivity to it.
You know, an email letter tomorrow morning is great. before we can
Okay.
get back to this.
Yeah, I imagine I'll put my signature on at the end of the meeting and we'll have it sent off to you in a timely manner.
We can
Thank
do
you.
both email
Yeah.
and hard copy.
Okay. All right. Business item B, final adoption of ordinance 2019-497, amending chapter 27, article 2, lodger's tax.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, this is the intent to adopt, this was done November 26th, at the November 26th meeting. No comments have been received as of to date for anything involving the lodger's tax ordinance.
Okay. All right, any questions or discussion on business item B?
No.
We've kind of already covered this, it's just kind of the final adoption, so hearing none, I would entertain a motion for business item B.
Mayor, I move to approve final adoption of ordinance 2019-497, amending chapter 27, article 2, lodger's tax.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Carla, please call the roll.
Mayor Snyder,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Fry,
Aye.
Commissioner Slack,
Aye.
Commissioner Randall,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis,
Aye.
motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Business item C, final adoption of ordinance 2019-498, an ordinance amending chapter 26, articles 3 and 4. Mr. Mueller?
Yes, sir, this, the intent to adopt this ordinance occurred on the December 17th City Commission meeting, and I'm not aware of any comments that have come in reference to this ordinance.
Okay. Excuse me. Open up for questions and discussion. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for business item C.
Mayor, I'd like to move to approve the final adoption of ordinance 2019-498, and ordinance amending chapter 26, articles 3 and 4.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Carla, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Snyder,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Fry,
Aye.
Commissioner Slack,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis,
Aye.
Commissioner Randall,
Aye.
motion passes 5-0.
Okay. All right. We are now getting ready to move into item 10 on the agenda, quasi-judicial hearings or land use. There's two items. Item A is for zone change 19-04 from C2 to O1 for property located at 100 Simons Road. And then item B, or the second one, is conditional use permit to allow for a church in a C1 district for property located at 222 North Main Avenue. So some of you may be familiar with this, some may not. I apologize in advance, it's a bit lengthy, but there is a land use hearing procedure that I have to read through before we get started, okay? So I want to ask if there's anybody here for either one of these land use items. If you haven't signed in at the clerk's desk, do so now, please, because once we get started, we're not going to start and stop and allow additions as far as interested parties, et cetera, witnesses and so on. So if you feel like if you're here for that, please take care of that right now if you wouldn't mind. So I will go right into this. The following hearing procedure is for all hearings on tonight's agenda. A land use hearing registration form is located on the clerk's table. For those who wish to receive a copy of the results from this hearing, you must provide your full name and current mailing address in order to receive a copy of the land use hearing order. If you wish to testify and provide comment on the matter at issue, you must register with the clerk on the land use hearing registration form and be sworn in with staff, the applicant, identified parties, witnesses, and interested persons. The meeting tonight will be conducted under procedures mandated by the New Mexico Court of Appeals in Battershell v. City of Albuquerque, which are intended to protect the due process rights of all parties. Under this rule, the following procedures will apply. First is parties to the meeting will be identified as will any witnesses. The parties may wish to give testimony, as well as any interested persons wishing to testify and provide comment. Second, city staff has a responsibility to assist the commission in fully developing the meeting record and may testify. Third, all persons offering testimony will be sworn in by the clerk, mayor, or city, I don't know if that's supposed to say city attorney, it just says we're city. Fourth, attorney who are authorized to administer oaths. Okay, I see what happened. Or city attorney who are authorized to administer oaths. Apologies. Next is all persons offering testimony will be subject to cross-examination by commission, city staff, and the parties to the hearing. And last, testimony will be limited to the relevant matter being heard. Excuse me. So, next is the procedure and a definition of items to be discussed. The items to be decided at tonight's public hearing are zone change 19-04, zone change request from the C2 General Commercial and Wholesale District to the O1 Office and Institutional District for property located at 100 Simons Road, Aztec, New Mexico, and CUP 19-02, conditional use permit to allow a church in a C1 zoning district. Testimony will be limited by the mayor. Next is identification of parties. For the purpose of this meeting, applicants are defined as Jason Quigley for property located at 100 Simons Road and Danny Boss for property located at 222 North Main Avenue. Other persons may be designated by the commission as parties if they can show to the satisfaction of the commission that they have an immediate pecuniary or direct interest in the outcome of the meeting. Witnesses are those persons designated by parties to present testimony on their behalf. Interested persons are those persons interested in the case but not identified as either a party by commission or a witness by any party. Aside from the applicant or applicants and city staff, are there any persons who wish to be identified as a party to this or these items? Sir? Did you?
I'm with New Harvest Fellowship.
Okay. And you signed
Yes.
as an interested party or a witness or?
As a,
Okay.
I'm the applicant for the 100 Simons Road.
Okay. All right. So, if you would please state your name, address, item you wish to be a party to, which we already have that. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Jason Quigley.
Jason Quigley, and I'm sorry, say your name again?
my name's Eric Niera.
Okay. Let's see. And your immediate pecuniary or direct interest in the outcome of this meeting. Are you the property owner, sir?
Yes.
Okay, and you're a witness too for the church?
An officer of the church.
Okay.
I'm also signed in, I'm the pastor of the church, and I'm Danny Boss.
Danny Boss, okay. Thank you, sir.
Also, the current tenant of the property is here as a witness. There you have it.
Thank you.
Did he get signed in on the?
Yeah, he signed it.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Payne, you're here for which item? Because I have 3 folks signed up here, but it doesn't specifically say which land use item that they're here for.
I'm here to support the church.
Okay. I'm going to make just a little mark here. Thank you. Mr. Treywick, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you're the tenant at Simon's?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Quigley, you're the owner of the property at Simon's? Okay. Thank you for bearing with me on that. Okay.
Was there 2 sheets there, Mayor?
Yeah, but there wasn't anything,
Oh, no,
yeah.
the other one? Oh.
It was just a kind of defining the roles as what they want to be, or what they're saying. Okay, so we're now moving into the land use hearing part of the meeting. Is there a challenge to the jurisdiction of the City of Aztec Commissioners to hear any of the hearings on tonight's agenda? Seeing none? No? Okay. Are there any conflicts of interest or personal biases to be declared by any commission member?
No.
None? No. Okay. Reflect that none. have there been any ex parte contacts regarding the upcoming matters that a commission member needs to declare?
No.
No. Hearing none? Will the staff, applicants, and parties identified by the commission, all witnesses, and any interested persons wishing to testify regarding, this is a little bit of a mess here. For others testifying, please stand and raise your right hand. Okay, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth under penalty of perjury? Yes. Say I do. Okay. Go ahead and please take your seats. Okay. Testimony and evidence must be directed in any applicable federal, state, or municipal laws or regulations or criteria which the person testifying believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford us and other interested persons an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal on that issue. Any party as identified by the commission may request a continuance of this hearing if available to provide documentation or evidence in support or opposition of the application in addition to what was available at the time that notice of this hearing was provided. In the conduct of land use hearings, unless there is a continuance, if a participant so requests before the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, the record shall remain open for at least 7 days after the hearing. So now we're moving to the order of presentations. First, staff will summarize the staff report to the extent necessary to enable those present to understand the issues before the commissioners. The commission members may ask questions of the staff. Cross-examination by applicant and parties. Next, the applicant, to include their witness or witnesses, have up to 15 minutes. The commission members may ask questions of the applicant. Cross-examination may be done by staff and parties. Witnesses may be cross-examined, but do not have the authority to cross-examine. And then next, parties, to include their witness or witnesses, have up to 10 minutes each. The commission members may ask questions of the parties. Cross-examination by staff and applicant. Witnesses may be cross-examined, but again do not have the authority to cross-examine. And then fourth, interested persons, have up to 5 minutes each. The commission members may ask questions of the interested persons. Cross-examination by staff, applicant, and parties. Interested persons may be cross-examined but do not have the authority to cross-examine. And then we will close the hearing to testimony, and the commission will discuss the issue amongst themselves and make a decision and issue findings of fact and conclusions of law. Move into closed session pursuant to New Mexico Statute 10.15.1H-1, the Open Meetings Act exception. Continue the public hearing until a specified time, or take the matter under advisement and announce your recommendation at a specified time. Okay. Anybody ready to recite that back? That was a lot of stuff, so I appreciate your patience, and we will now go ahead and move into quasi-judicial ruling A, zone change 19-04 from C2 to O1 for property located at 100 Simons Road. Mr. Saavedra will start with as the staff.
Right. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Commission. So we are gathered today to hear two zoning cases. First case is a zone change. Property is located at 100 Simmons Road. Subject property. I'm going to dim the lights. I know we always like to set the mood right. So there's some maps, there's some pictures.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, maybe a little bit so we can see the display a little better.
Thank you.
So I'm going to run through the PowerPoint presentation and then get into the facts, get into the analysis, and any questions, concerns, comments, we'll go from there. But as you can see right here, this is 100 Simmons Road. It's currently located in a C2 general and wholesale commercial district. The applicant, Jason Quigley, and is represented by Kristen Johnson. The property is approximately 0.11 acres. And the request comes before you because the property owner seeks to sell the property. As it stands right now, the use is residential and the zoning is commercial. And the two do not align. As a result, lending companies and financial institutions are not comfortable lending money when the zoning and use do not align. Often this is called a legal nonconformance. If the zoning changed, but yet there was residential prior, that would be considered a legal nonconformance. There's also nonconformance, which means that it may not even be legal. For example, if you have a use that was commercial, and then you decided to use it as industrial, well, that's not legal with zoning in the city of Aztec. So that's basically what's going on in a nutshell right now. Current use is residential, but the zoning is commercial. As you can see, in the sea of red, this is all zone commercial. However, properties along here are utilized as residential. This is the conflict that a lot of lending institutions now check to make sure that if they're going to lend out money, that they're going to get a return on their investment. And so the term substantially damaged is what lending institutions like to identify. If this property right here was to be burned or flooded or destroyed by more than 50%, can it be rebuilt as residential? Or with our current zoning code, it's C2. That zoning district specifically states it's for commercial, not residential. The only type of residential that can be utilized in the C2 district is accessory dwelling units or apartments with a conditional use. So that's the conflict right now. Lending institutions do not feel comfortable, and they've asked the city of Aztec, in particular on this piece of property, could this house be rebuilt if it's substantially damaged? And the answer is no, because we don't have that in our zoning code. We don't have an exception within our zoning code that allows that. Now step back a little bit and think. This area has been zoned commercial for decades. For the earliest records that we've uncovered, all this quarter is commercial. And my guess, and it is a guess, is the intent of the city decades ago was that this is an arterial route. There's high traffic counts, 27,000 approximately. And so what you often see in cities is when you have an arterial, a commercial corridor, you want to have commercial uses along that route. Now, this isn't always the case. When you see cities develop in different parts, there's some exceptions, but by and large, you have Aztec Boulevard and you have Main, and those are primarily commercial areas along corridors. So this is just to give you some context on where this particular piece of property is at, right here. And so you have Westside Plaza, Boys and Girls Club, you have the Greenleaf property, which remains undeveloped, and then you have property right here that is currently owned by the Chappies. Gas station right here, and then you have the laundromat, and then Sonic right there. So the property abuts Aztec Boulevard. However, as you can see, there is residential down Simmons Road. Now, when the property owner purchased this, and he had purchased the property in 2009, and he purchased it as C2. That was the zoning district. It never changed. In fact, there was the Animus Pregnancy Center at this location at one time. And prior to that, it looks like there was a church of some sort in 2008. So it was always zoned commercial. City did not just arbitrarily go in there and change it. I think the property owner, when he gets his opportunity to come up here, will explain how he went through that process. From our understanding, according to the records that Mr. Quigley has shown us, is that he bought it with the understanding that he could have residential, and he could sell it as residential. That's according to Mr. Quigley and the realtor that he had at the time. The fact of the matter is, it's zoned C2. Nothing's changed. You can only utilize it, or you're only supposed to utilize it as commercial. So as you can see, this is just to give you some context. This is a street view. Now, this is not a current image. This is 2012. This is just to showcase what Simmons Road looks like if you were looking north. You can see residential, little bit of open space right there, and then Mr. Quigley's property right there. And this is just to give some more context if you were looking the other way. Vacant property, roughly Sonic and the car wash is in this area, Boys and Girls Club right there. Now, this is actually as of last year. This is Aztec Boulevard, this is the property. I know the lighting is poor, I apologize, but this is the property right here. And in good lighting, you'd see that's an amazing shot. Google got it right. That sun is amazing. So everybody that's a part of Aztec should feel proud where they live right now. Now, this is an older image. This is 2008. This is a Google Street View. This is the subject property. This had a business of some sort, a church, a pregnancy center, at one time here. Okay. So this is back in 2008, prior to Mr. Quigley purchasing the property. Mr. Quigley Jason had purchased this from Animas Pregnancy Center at the time. Okay, so before we get into the recommendation, we try to get an idea of what's going on, and go through the who, what, where, and who cares. I know Mr. Quigley's here before you because he wants to change the zoning. And believe it or not, it's actually a big deal because it affects not only his property, but those around it. When we make these decisions, or the city commission makes these decisions, there has to be the understanding that what happens, what is the potential if you zone change this property or you don't zone change this property. So we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. But first, in the staff report, there was an analysis given, and I'm just going to roughly go through some of the stuff, and if there's some more detailed questions, we'll get into that. But I think first off, we have to look at the first question that was in the application, and hopefully Mr. Jason Quigley could expand on this. But what we ask in city code and in the application is this zone change detrimental to the property and to the neighborhood as a whole? Now, community development understands that this property has been there, or at least in this context, for the last 10 years, even though it has been zoned commercial. And there's no indication that there will be an increase of noise, bright lights, fumes, or any negative externality that's associated with commercial property as it's residential. So this zone change should not be detrimental to the property and to the neighborhood itself. Now, if you down zone and you go from commercial to residential or commercial to office, by and large, and of course economies change depending on the area, but you lose property value. Typically, commercial property has a higher valuation than office and residential. Okay. And I think it's also important to note that when we're looking at this property, will it alter and change the character of the surrounding neighborhood? Well, yes and no. It's been this way, as you've seen down Simmons Road. It's all, for the most part, residential, so community development does not feel that's going to change. However, this, if changed and continuing to be utilized as residential, may alter the commercial properties that abut it. The Greenleaf property and that vacant property by the Chafees. So it may have an impact. So when you get a call or an email at 2 in the morning because this commercial property just out here is having a party or their lights are too bright, and I'm a resident and I want that to stop, those are the situations that could happen when you mix residential and commercial too close together. Those are some of the issues that we face. So by and large, though, community development does not feel that this property will be detrimental to the surrounding areas, specifically because it's being utilized in such manner. One important criteria to take into consideration, at least the planning department, community development takes into consideration, is will this zone change set a precedent which may alter the intent of the land use regulation? And the answer to that is yes. You change this, you're changing that sea of red that we saw there. Basically what you're going to have with an O1 district, and the only O1 district does allow residential and office, which you could kind of make the argument that there's some commercial activity if you have an office, Animus Pregnancy Center, things of that nature. But by and large, what you're going to have is a spot zone. And when you have all red and you put an O right there, that changes the characteristic of the zoning map. So yes. In addition, you have a down zone. So you go from commercial activity, you want performance zoning next to a commercial quarter, you take it down. So I think one of the questions that we hear a lot in Aztec is business unfriendly. We hear that all the time. I think we've heard that for the last 20 years, 30 years. I know some, EDAD, we talk about it all the time. Well, if you reduce commercial property, the question has to be asked, are you business friendly when you're removing commercial property? That's the question to the commission. And the answer is yes. And it's not my opinion, that's logic, that's a fact. Okay. So if the zoning changes, it does alter. It does set a precedent. It does change the dynamic of this area. It's just what will happen. We'll add an O1, we'll change the color of that map, and it becomes a spot zone. It's just a fact. That doesn't mean all spot zones are necessarily bad. There's some situations where they may be necessary. But by and large, as a city attorney from previous zoning cases have weighed in, there could be some legal jeopardy from the city as a result of that. A spot zone, and why it's so important, why I will stress this, is that a spot zone or any zoning should not benefit solely one property owner. The idea of zoning is to benefit the neighborhood or the city as a whole. So I'll give you an example, and I really want to hone on this point because it is important. I own a piece of property that's residential. I come before the city commission and say I want a zone change, and the reason why I want a zone change is because I know my property is more valuable as commercial. I'm going to turn it into a bar. So I'm requesting a zone change because I feel I can get more money out of my property if I sell it as a bar or if I utilize it as a bar. So I come before you, I request all the good reasons. It's helping the economic base, it's helping GRT because we're adding in more business. I'm pretty sure you'd say, Mr. Saavedra, what are you doing? Where you live, is it surrounded by commercial? No, it's all residential. And what's it going to do to the properties around you? I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll like it, maybe they won't. The same logic applies here. It cannot be just for the sole benefit of one person. It has to be for the benefit of the neighborhood as a whole or the community as a whole. So, let's move on. Does the zone change impose any health or safety issues to the public? Mr. Bellman does not feel that this zone change request would do that, just based on evidence in the past as residential. Is this zone change consistent with the Aztec Comprehensive Plan or the Master Zone District? It is not. Aztec's comprehensive plan area has been put forth to support commercial activity as opposed to not support it. And then lastly, is there any alternate land use action that might be considered to accomplish the need of this property owner? And again, if this is not the property owner's fault, when he'll get up here and he'll say I don't think he wants to be here, to be honest. He drove all the way from Oklahoma to be here. 9 hours, if I understand correct? 13 hours, I stand correct. He doesn't want to be here. And the reason why is because he's just looking to sell the property. He's been put in a bad spot. Now, it's not the fault of the city or anybody on this commission for the reason of, or the situation at hand. But the only thing that can be considered is possibly a conditional use permit. Now, that's discouraged because conditional use do not transfer ownership. So Jason gets a conditional use permit to allow a one-time thing that if the property gets destroyed or significantly damaged, he can rebuild it. However, he sells the property, it changes hands, and this other property owner decides at one point in the future to do the same thing, wants to sell it, commission change, ideas change. He may not be able to have the same opportunity as Mr. Jason Quigley did. So yes, you can give a CUP to satisfy it. It satisfies it now, but it doesn't accomplish the goal. And you're helping somebody and you're hurting somebody else. So that's the situation at hand. It's a tough situation. I don't envy anybody as part of this, including the commission. So some suggested options going forward: denial of the zone change. approval of the zone change or table the zone change for more information related to this matter. Now, it's also important to note the Economic Development Advisory Board did not weigh in on this because we didn't have a meeting in November or December. So it's within commission's right to table it if they need more information pertaining to this. It is an economic matter because you're taking commercial property and you're potentially changing it. However, with the reasons at hand, primarily because it's a down zone in a commercial corridor, and it's a spot zone, community development is concerned about the precedent that it may set, and therefore ultimately is recommending denial of this request. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Yeah, Mr. Vader, I have a question. And again, it's for the folks here at the meeting tonight, and of course, as a reminder, I guess, or refresher maybe. We had one of these. This is almost a carbon copy, just changing the address from what we encountered maybe, 3 months ago, give or take. Very similar anyway. Is that what, if any, ramifications could come based on our previous findings and decision and vote on that last case if we changed course on this case?
Great
I
question.
don't know if I worded that very well.
I think you did.
Did I
I think
word
it's a
that
great
okay?
question. I know, a good thing we have a skilled attorney right there to weigh in, but
If you want me to speak to that, Mr. Saavedra, I'd be more than happy to. First of all, Mr. Mayor, I think if a court reviews the decision of the commission based on a land use denial or grant, or if somebody appeals the decision here, it would be a substantial evidence on the record inquiry. So if they would then say, oh, well, they denied this one, but they granted Mr. Quigley's, I would have to look at the date and time. That was before my, I guess, retention as far as the city attorney, but in my mind, probably the time for that to appeal has passed. However, I don't believe anything would bar them from actually doing another land use permit and having another hearing. I'd have
And
to,
then basing that off of the new precedent.
exactly. So it's kind of a slippery slope.
Right.
and correct me if I'm wrong, Tyson, I think there could be the possibility, or at least the perceived possibility, that there's some type of discrimination. You approved this one, but denied that one. And if the reasons are the same, then you better have a good explanation.
Yeah, if it's
on
basically
why
a
that
carbon
one
copy case, then why did we
was
do
denied
one for
and this
one
one
and
was
one
approved.
something different for another?
Yes.
Yep.
And I do remember that was not a pleasant land use hearing either. Okay, that's the only question I had, is to kind of clarify that. And does anybody else have any
Thank you.
questions or comments?
Mr. Saavedra, just for my own clarification and maybe edification as well, I notice, obviously this was built as a residence. This wasn't built as a commercial property. And I know Simon's Road has several of these. If it was Zone C for commercial, how did these residential structures, why were they allowed to be built there?
Well, it's a great question, and it's something that we always battle. So I think with this one provides a little bit of evidence to answer that question. So they were built residential over the years. Of course, the city had an idea of its changes to commercial. But as of 2009, what should have happened was the realtor definitely should have caught it and done their due diligence to make sure that it was commercial and it was being sold as the correct listing. But as you see with this property, it went from commercial as the Animas Pregnancy Center, and Mr. Quigley bought it, and slowly but surely, it became residential. And I don't think the city caught it. And I hope I'm answering your question correctly, and if I'm not, please correct me. But the city didn't catch it for whatever reason, and I don't know what happened. Probably it wasn't on the high priority list. It fit in with the rest of the landscape, so I'm assuming that was the case. But what should have happened was the moment that it changed from a business and started acting like residential, the city should have caught it to say, hey, we got a zoning issue, and we got to address it now as opposed to later. Is that answering your question?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Okay, if I were going to move into a neighborhood
Okay.
and buy property and build residential homes, but I know it's zoned C for commercial.
Yeah.
But yet, I went ahead and built, why were they allowed to build the homes there in the first place, is what I was wondering.
It was zoned after.
It was, yeah, the
zoned
homes were
after.
pre-existing, and then
Okay,
the zoning
okay.
changed, is that right?
Right.
No.
Okay, so
But at the
originally it
time
was
of
okay.
purchase.
Right. This
The
property
zoning.
originally was platted in 1945.
Okay,
And the house was built in 1955. And somewhere around the time frame, the city, I'm assuming in the 70s, 80s, decided to master plan this whole entire area along Aztec Boulevard to commercial.
okay.
And if this house was operating as residential when the city did that, it would be grandfathered in, and there would be no issues with it. Now, when you make a significant change to that property, if it goes vacant for some times, at least within city code for over a year, it loses that status. This one never lost that status per se in 2009, it was always commercial. So it's not technically a legal nonconformance, it's just a nonconformance at this point.
Okay. Thank you, that explains it.
Mayor, I have a couple of questions. So if I'm understanding this right, it was a residence to begin with, but then when whoever let the Animas Pregnancy Center and a church, I think you said a church maybe, when they came in, then because the whole thing was zoned commercial, then it automatically, I mean, it kind of went, the use went with the commercial property, but then now that it's been bought back as a residence, right? I don't know. I'm
Well, it
not
was
stating-
bought in 2009 as a commercial property, and then kind of morphed into a residential
Yeah,
property.
but I'm saying, but originally it was a residence, then it morphed into commercial,
right.
and then now it's morphed back into residence,
Right.
right? So I know, it's been,
Animas Pregnancy Center was also residential in the same building.
If we could, yeah,
oh, they had okay.
that's okay, I
But-
understand.
So, okay, so I get that part. But if it's listed as a commercial property, but the lot's pretty small, I mean, is there enough land there to zone it commercial, I guess? I mean, I know it's already zoned commercial, but there's not enough land there for anybody to really do a whole lot with commercially?
That's the question. Is there enough space to run a business out of it?
Right.
I guess my answer would be yes, because there was businesses there at some
Okay.
point. And
So
so it's
even-
not a lot,
Even with our parking and all that?
even with our parking. I mean, anytime you have a high density and lack of a space, it creates challenges. But to the question is, can a business be successful there? Or can a business be there with parking requirements and other things? Well, yes. I mean, the question is,
It has-
depending on the
yeah.
type of business, if you want to have a auto dealership and you're going to have cars everywhere, no.
Right.
I mean, it has to be, conducive to what you have. Could it be an office for an office zoning district? Yes, it can. Could it be a pregnancy center? Again, yes. Could it be a salon? Yes. There's enough parking and
For those kinds of?
yeah, because how we look at parking is also based on square footage of the property. So if we're gonna say, your area of space is 5,000 square feet, well, then we're gonna expect to have X amount of parking. The smaller the dwelling space is proportionate, so you're not gonna have as many requirements for parking and things of that nature.
I have one more, sorry.
Of course.
So if we did grant a conditional use permit, this is if, or let me go back one. If we did postpone this till EDAB had a chance to look at it, then we'd have to come back and go through the whole.
That's correct.
The whole quasi judicial process again, right?
Yes.
And then my other question is, if we granted a conditional use permit, if I understand from the last one the last land use that we had that was like this one, the bank still won't recognize, because of a conditional use, they won't recognize the loan
Both great
because
questions.
it's conditional with the owner.
It stays with the current owner.
Yeah, and I can't speak for any bank. I can tell you, and I think those are both great questions, and let me go with the latter and then, so when, in City of Farmington, when I worked there, they had the same mechanism. They would issue CUPs, conditional use permits, for situations like this. And banks, and again, it depends on the bank and depends on their lending practices, how fiscally conservative they are, how much of a risk they're willing to take. There was often times where individuals would go through this process and the bank still wouldn't lend the money. Now, from this situation, all the bank is looking for, I don't know if they really care about our zoning, our land use, or our future plans. All they care about is, can this house be rebuilt if substantially damaged? And again, that's not a city matter. Nobody in the city really created this situation. Maybe in the 1970s or 80s, you could blame whoever decided to master plan this, blame them, but right now, nobody did this. But what cities were experiencing is that a bank may not be willing because you still have a legal non-conformance situation. You still have other issues. So let's go through this scenario and I think it's a great one. If it gets destroyed and you grant a CUP, well, that CUP better be very specific, because let's just hypothetically say it burns down and they want to start up again because a conditional use permit was granted. What are the setbacks? That better be identified in that conditional use permit. That's a small lot, as you identified. The O1 district has some pretty stringent setbacks. The R1 district, R2 district has some setbacks. If you had 25-foot setback in the front and a 15 or 20 in the back, where does this house go? So if a conditional use permit is granted, setback requirements, lot size requirements, dwelling size requirements have to be looked at, because it's not good enough just to say, let's give you a CUP so you could rebuild the house. Great, that helps the property owner. But let's just say when it does burn down and this gentleman wants to, or gentlelady wants to build the house up again, and they don't meet the setbacks, did we improve the situation for this property owner, or did we hurt them in the long run?
And then that potentially opens up more unattended circumstances.
Yes, and so it's not to say a CUP can't be granted in the future, it just has to be very specific to make sure. And this is also with the assumption that we're going to retain C2 property or O1 property with those same setbacks 10, 20, 30 years from now. But to answer your question, it is a possibility. We would have to go through the process, and I think you bring up a very critical and important point. When Jason purchased the property, he was told that this was C2, but if you use it as residential, then the zoning just changes to residential. That's not how it works. You
Right.
got to go through this process. You got to go in front of the city commission. You know, if you didn't have to, I would have a bar where I'm at right now and sell it for that much. But unfortunately, that's the process within the state of New Mexico, and I'm not sure of any other state that does it different as well.
Thank you.
I have a question. Or
Yes, sir.
just clarification from Stephen. So the main issue now, and similar to the last one that we saw, was the ability to sell the property for lending institutions.
Correct.
What throws me off is the legal nonconformance or the just nonconformance.
Yeah.
The use it's in now, is it, I mean, what's the issue there? I mean, I understand he
Yeah.
will be able to sell it if it's, or, potentially can't get, funding if someone wanted to buy the property, but is there a more immediate issue?
Immediate issue, no. I mean, from the city standpoint, nobody went after this property, nobody was beating them down, say, hey, this is C2, we're gonna
Okay.
kick you out. But the long-run planning, the precedent that it may set is, if the city wants this area to be commercial, then it will have an impact on that. And that's the situation that we face right now.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is, like I mentioned, I don't think he's a bad guy or did anything in ill will or bad intent. The fact of the matter is, you zone change it to O1. It really doesn't change the characteristic of the neighborhood. It's been utilized as a house since 2009. The big issue, though, is that spot zone. That's the big issue. The legal ramifications that could occur from that, that's where the planning department, community development department is uncomfortable about recommending approval. Because if, in fact, we get sued, then, well, we set a roadmap for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vader. Okay, does anybody have any other questions, Mr. Vader, before I move into our applicant? Mr. Quigley. I didn't realize you drove from Oklahoma, I'm sorry. Well,
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, for taking the time to do this. At the risk of I don't want to come off as a victim of somebody else's, I don't know anything about the other case. What I do know is about this case. And there's a tenant that wants to buy it, a disabled veteran, the house is perfect for him. I don't think any of us wants to be party of throwing him out because of zoning, and I'm going to show you some documentation that I was given, and I'll give you some explanations that make this a little bit different, and I'm just going to play on the human side here because, like I said, I may not be on my A game, bear with me a little bit. 900 miles and 2 hours sleep, about 17 pots of coffee, I'm not on my A game.
I understand.
But Mr. Chadwick was at the closing table. You know, it's not like I want to do this so I can put a for sale sign. He wants to buy it. I want to sell it. He can buy it VA. I did everything. I spent lots of money getting it to a point where the VA would accept it, paying all the closing costs for him because it just didn't work out. I thought real estate, anyway, that's my own fault. But at the end of the day, so my first call is to Mr. Saavedra, right? And so when I called Stephen, he said, well, did you not get the registered letter? If you pull up that map, that would be helpful.
Ed, or
Which button?
Stephen, one of you guys.
Ed can do it.
This is full, this is map, but you need the whole
I just wanted that map.
map?
The zone map.
There we go. There it is. And the pointer is,
There you go.
no, the map.
There we go.
That one, thank you. And which one is the pointer, the laser pointer?
There's a green.
Okay, all right, thank you. I didn't want to accidentally mess something up. Okay, so, in driving around and looking at this, you know, and when I bought it, you drive down this thing, there's houses. They're all houses. They were built houses. At some point, they changed it. I don't know how you can fit a church in there. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house with a kitchen and a front room. That's what it is. The Animas Center used it as an office. And so at the end of this thing, I'm going to beg you to, there's a very elegant solution standing right in front of us that keeps us from going down all kinds of other rabbit holes that we don't need to go down when I show you the documentation. So this one faces this way, right? And you have all these homes. And so the first question Mr. Saavedra had is said, well, when we rezoned this one to mobile home, which is residential, you should have responded to the letter we sent out because we decided to offer everybody the same opportunity. I received no letter, and when I asked for a copy of the letter, when I was looking for the documentation, it turns out it didn't exist. Didn't get a letter. No letter was sent. So that whole thing changed right to begin with. Now, I'm going to give you a copy of what I was given by Gordon Crane. It's not my realtor. It was a realtor that was selling. I might pass these down. Now, using this is try to sell something out of this house.
I'll share.
I don't know. Okay, so first of all, if I'm going to sell it commercial, not going away. Greenleaf's have been trying to sell this thing. When I moved to Aztec in 2000, it was for sale. I drove by today, it's for sale. So there's nobody rushing to buy this thing commercial. And if I wanted to sell it commercial, I have to throw a disabled veteran out on the street. And he'll explain why he wants it. And there's got some very good reasons, and I want to sell it to him. Now, this being a commercial corridor, right across over here, it's not in any of the pictures, is the Family Dollar. And across from that's about 3 very nice homes that are facing Aztec Boulevard. So these ones are facing Simmons. And this is a big lot that can be used for something commercial. You could put a store in it, you could sell something. You could put a store in it, you could sell something. All these homes. Now, after speaking with both the Stevens were kind enough to give me a little of their time earlier when I got into town. This people here Terry does some work for them. They come in 2-3 times a year. They live in Riverside, California. Couldn't find any numbers to contact them to get their endorsement, but their plan, they have Terry do some work. They are planning on retiring there and living there as a residence. It's a home. That's their plan. And so if that letter went out, they certainly would have signed up to put these things back to residential. So you see this highlighted bill that I have here from Gordon. I called him, and now he couldn't make it. He's in some secondary education deal class in Farmington. I think he probably teaches it. Kind of leads to his level of expertise. He got this information from somewhere because it's very specific, very specific. And to go along with that, very specifically, I was given, on the disclosures, the same information when I'm buying this thing. Now, I asked my realtor, Gabe Cedillo, would you follow up on this and find out what this is? So let me back up. I called Gordon, talked to him. He said that's the information he was given from the zoning office. I mean, it's pretty specific. You can't make that up. And so then I asked my realtor to follow up on it, and trust me, I know how this is all sounding, and zoning is what it is. I'm just talking from the big dumb guy with a little bit of money that was trying to make a little bit more money, and it didn't work. So Gabe goes to the same office, and he says yes, and he was very, very forthright in cautioning me about putting a resident in there because it was indicated to him, of course he can't remember any names, all that, that if you put a resident in here, it will be zoned residential and you'll never get the commercial back. So there's been a paradigm shift within the city about what they wanted to do right here. Because I was strongly cautioned, don't put a resident in there if you ever plan on using it commercial, which I don't. Put a tenant in there right away. That was the intention, and this is what the information I was given. So all along, right from the very beginning, and I talked to Clyde Ward, here's the tax bills on it. I've been taxed on it since 2009 as residential. So here you go. Big dumb bald guy. Nice haircut, by the way, Mark. I like that. Big dumb bald guy thinks, okay, now it's residential. Like I said, it would make sense. You zone this one residential, I'm just going to say we, because I was part of the city at one time, and I really liked living in Aztec, actually. We put that one back to residential, we put that one back to residential. The teen center is residential for some reason, which seems like it's more of a, but whatever. This whole thing is called the Simmons Housing Subdivision. That's the name of it. So, there was a master plan, and then there was a shift, and then there was another shift. Okay, so my first appraisal, and I just highlighted the important parts. I've got the whole one if you'd like to, if you need to see it. But Glenda Burton, a licensed appraisal. There again, got the information from somewhere that it's residential. And then in 2014, I got it again. Needed some money to sell my house in Cocapelli subdivision and was underwater due to all that, so I had to refinance it. And so I got another appraisal backing up the first appraisal from another licensed appraiser. The first one was Lynn, I'm sorry, the second one was Glennsburg. First one was Lynn Lee. And I spoke to her. She's no longer in the business, didn't retain the records, claims she talked to somebody in the zoning office, as appraisers are supposed to do for $700 each at OWAC. So there's $1,400 worth of documentation there that I paid appraisers to tell me it's residential. Here's a notice of value. Says it's residential, right after I had that. So, you talk about what it's gonna do to everybody else. Well, we zone this not residential but mobile home. And it actually had a negative impact. It devalued my property because they made me an offer on it. And then I had to immediately go back and modify it to a lower price. And the large issue was because of the mobile homes, which is fine. I'm fine with that price. Don't get me wrong. But what you're saying it does to other properties happened to me. So I'm catching it coming and going on this whole deal. And so in the guidebook, the division S, the 5 variances, a little blurry, I should have brought my reading glasses if I'm not sleeping. But it says the purpose in hardships, and this is creating a big time hardship because this thing was bought. The whole purpose was this, to sell this at this time, around this time in my life, because I've got 4 kids in college, 3 of them are girls, and they're expensive as it is anyway. But I had 4 teenage girls all at once in the same house, so you should probably go with me just on that alone. So, anyway, it's a hardship because every other property here and here have been for sale is commercial. So theoretically, it's worth more money. But as you all know, when you try to sell something, it's only worth what somebody's willing to give you, right? Ever. Well, we've got somebody willing to give some money. The underwriter had a problem at the 11th hour. They were at the table, said, wait, what's this? And then started researching and say, we can't lend it because of that. So got a couple other handouts here. I want to make sure that they're relevant. Here's the other 2. One, there has definitely been a paradigm shift because the application on this one for the 112 was so they could put it up for sale. That was approved at 112. And then at 104, there's the information for that one. This is all 2017, I believe. So I don't see why we're so hung up on a theoretical business that's probably never, ever going to happen on this .11 acre when you have a guy, a disabled veteran that wants to live there if it's perfect for his life. It's exactly what he's looking for. So my asking for it to be zoned as 01 as an office, you could use that as an office down the road if that's the zoning. It was used as an office with the pregnancy center. I don't know where the church came from, because if you can fit a church in there, it must have had quite the congregation, that's all I can say. So what I'm begging and pleading the commission to do is the right thing here. Given what I'm given, I moved to Aztec, lived here for almost 10 years before this, and then another 12 total, but was here almost 10 years before I bought this property, so I thought I could put a little nest egg aside for the kids' college fund, and come time to sell it, and then you find out not only does it fall under the hardship, but it's like, okay, so now we're talking about throwing a disabled vet out on the street, and I gotta yank one of my kids out of college because I can't afford it. That's kind of a hardship. I mean, that's not gonna happen, but it definitely falls under the guidelines of hardship. Nothing has sold anywhere near this property in C1. And when I asked when the last time a property was sold C1 in this area, some big dumb bald guy bought it accidentally. That's the last time something was ever sold under that zoning there. So we have about, I don't know how many more ways I can slice it. It's in the code book under the variances and the hardships. Definitely falls under that. Nothing else is, it's not going to hang a shingle on it. Nobody's going to have to see a for sale sign. Nothing's going to change other than the guy now owns it, changes property, and if it burns down, he can rebuild his house. and it's owned 01, which would make sense for along here, because I guarantee you, these people are gonna be in here beating down your door looking for it to be residential, because everybody else is. It's a residence. I mean, really, if you haven't driven down that road, you need to go look. There's nothing that even resembles anything commercial on Simmons. It's the Simmons subdivision. So, having this one as 01 does make sense at the end of this bordering up there, because that means you can, in the future, use it for an office, and, yeah, you could make an office out of it. You could do that. Can't, no room to sell anything. But, anyway, that's where I'm at with it, and I'll let Terry tell you why he wants to buy it and why he loves living there. And, you know, it was good enough for me, so I jumped through as many hoops as I could and paid for the closing costs, and doing everything I could do to get the guy in there. My dad fought in Vietnam. I'm all for the vets. He was a Marine, and you know, I'm just about trying to do the right thing. And that's what I'm asking you folks to do, is the right thing. I understand the zoning and all that. There was a master plan 50 years ago. Didn't come to fruition. Jobs are leaving, not coming. Hopefully if this thing goes through, then maybe you get a few. I hope you do. But even if they do, I don't see anybody scrambling to throw a bunch of businesses along there. If Greenleaf's lucky, and I hope he does, he'll be able to sell that and do something with it. But since I've been here, the businesses are dropping. TNT fence at the end, on the other side of those houses, gone.
Sure.
You know, that's just one example.
Yes, sir.
So,
We're approaching we've slightly exceeded the 15 minutes, so if you could.
okay, well, I'm sorry.
I appreciate it. I appreciate your trip, and I want to give you as much leniency as we can.
Yeah, well, so I appreciate, hopefully I've properly, you know, effectively laid it out to you folks, and like I said, there's two ways this can go. Well, there's three ways, but really only two ways. You approve it or you don't, and if you don't, that's a whole other rabbit hole, because now Gordon Crane's real estate license comes into question, and then he has to identify the person. And now the city's culpable under the city's insurance because they've handed him the information. You know, maybe it ends with his licensure, or maybe it keeps going to the city. I mean, we have the elegant solution right in front of us for this. And I'm just asking that you do it. And I'll turn it over to Terry, and he can explain why he'd like to live in it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right, Mr. Trewick? I think that one's on, it should be.
Yeah, it should.
Yeah.
I don't really have a whole lot to add to that. I don't know anything about the zonings. All I know is I was renting the place, been there for 2.5 years, 100% disabled from the military, and got paranoia, depression, anxiety, and auditory hallucinations. It takes a lot. I don't even want to be here. That house I've lived in for 2.5 years, it's set up the way I need it set up for my life. Right where I want to be. I'm in a town that I enjoy living in. I got neighbors that I enjoy having. And everything I need is right close. I don't have to drive to Farmington, which is a relief to me. Everything's right here. I stay in Aztec. If I can, I don't even drive. I can walk to everything there. It's the most convenient place for me to live. I've got security systems set up there. I have my home set up there. I have everything fixed up for me, for everything I need to live. So I would prefer not to have to move or have to rebuild again somewhere else and go through all the stress and anxiety that I've already gone through in order to get this far. So if y'all could help me out and let me purchase this home, I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate your service, thank you. I know we have a few vets out here in the crowd for sure. There isn't anybody else that is listed on here on this particular land use item. is there anybody that wanted to ask any questions of Mr. Quigley or Mr. Traywick? Any cross-examination? Okay, so we will go ahead and move into a discussion phase on this.
I have one thing, man. I kind of glossed over about the registered letter thing. I don't know if it ever got issued, we couldn't find it, but the intention was to offer that to the adjacent landowners, as Mr. Surveyor described to me. I would have jumped on it, and I know the other ones would have. But it turned out that the letter never got sent.
So let me address that question.
Yes, sir.
So, and good thing it's, we swore an oath. Fact of the matter is, in 2017, 104 and 112 came before the commission, not because somebody was wanting to sell the property. So let me just make sure that that record is straight. Those were some issues that they were having, primarily because you had a mobile home in a commercial zoning district, not any different from Jason right here. Fact of the matter is, at that time, at the direction of the city manager, he had asked that we send out letters to everybody in the area, letting them know that this could be a potential issue down the line. And at that point, we sent letters, including to Mr. Jason Quigley. Now, it wasn't certified, and so I think that's what he's referencing, because when they did a records request, we did provide the letter that was sent. Now, it wasn't sent certified, and so I believe that's what he is referencing in terms of that receipt, okay? Now, the fact of the matter is, and it's not important to get into some of that stuff, is who gets letters, who doesn't get letters. I mean, we've sent letters to this property at least 7 times related to other things. So, things get lost. I understand there's, and right now it's irrelevant at that point. And really, what that situation would have done was look at this area so that if this was mobile home at that time, and it wasn't a spot zone because it was mobile home in the area, should these properties come into conformance with the surrounding area? And at that time in 17, the commission decided that that was the best option for those ones. There's no guarantee in 17, just because of the commercial corridor, because it abuts Aztec Boulevard, that property would have automatically been zone changed to mobile home. In fact, I highly doubt it, because that house is not a mobile home. So the commission in 17 wouldn't have been solving any issues. But the reason that letter was sent out to those property owners was to get buy-in, so you're not benefiting one property owner. So you're benefiting the neighborhood as a whole, so you don't have issues with the spot zone. At that time, only 2 individuals took notice of that and decided to come forward and apply for a zone change. So I think that has to be stated. As far as some other things, and again, my job is not to argue with the property owner. The fact of the matter is, it's a tough situation that he's in. And I don't envy anybody on the commission. I don't envy him. I would hate to be in that situation. But I think Jason hit it on the head. If you zone change that and you give the opportunity to all the other property owners to zone change it, then you set the precedent. You change the area. So he's exactly right. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. The only bad thing could happen is if it's only for one benefit. And a hardship was mentioned as a variance. Economic standing is not a criteria. Anybody can claim economic hardship. The fact of the matter is, we look at the neighborhood as a whole. Does this benefit this area? This zone change, for all intents and purposes, it's a residential use, and there is residential. He's exactly right. That's a fact. Now, is it going to change the characteristic of this area from not just now, but 10 years from now? Potentially. Negatively? Potentially. If the city is trying to be business friendly and you're reducing commercial property, are you actually getting closer to that goal? So those are things to consider. I'm not going to get into licensing and boarding crane. Fact of the matter is, if it's not on paper, and lending officers and appraisers should not be calling us getting yay or nay approval. It's not how it works anymore. You need to put something on paper, something that you can document in writing. Because if I made a mistake and it's in paper, there you go. It's our fault, my fault, made a mistake, no fault of their own. But if you call anybody from the city and say, hey, is this good or bad, chances are you can get the answer if you know the right questions to ask and the right individuals to ask. So I can't speak to who those appraisers spoke to. That's not how we work anymore. If you want something, it has to be put on paper so that there's a paper trail, there's documentation.
Thanks, sir. All right, commissioners. I guess we should open this up for some discussion. We've heard quite a bit. Anybody want to start?
I thought this probably would be fairly simple because we've already previously made a decision about a similar situation, and that person, was distressed because they couldn't sell their property. And if we do something different with this one, then we're putting ourselves in some kind of legal situation that person can come back, right? That was the...
So hypothetically, yeah.
Hypothetically, I think if you did something different with this one, I don't know the facts of the other one. I think I would have to look at the timeline for appeal, but usually appeals are, within a month. And my understanding is the last land use that was similar to Mr. Quigley's dilemma was in October.
Yeah, it's been
I would
months.
assume that the time has lapsed for an appeal, but I don't think that would necessarily stop them from asking for another variance to the code.
So where the potential issue would be, even though the appeal process has lapsed or the timeline has lapsed, so if we were, let's suppose hypothetically we approve this spot zone change, then they could come back and say, well, we're going to reapply.
Right.
And then we would be in a situation and a precedent to where we would have to approve that one again, or, well, we wouldn't have to, but if we didn't, we would be in a situation to where then they would say, hey, how come you gave it to this guy?
Right, and I
This
think that-
lady, this whoever, and then move forward, and then we would be potentially...
Well, somebody mentioned a discrimination
Right, and that's what I was going to say,
situation.
bias or discrimination. That's always subjective, and, reasonable minds probably differ on what's discrimination
Right.
and bias as far as land use and quasi-judicial hearings go. But I could see that happening. But once again, the underlying, if they appealed it to district court, the underlying, I guess, standard of review would be substantial evidence on the record. So they would look at this and say, does the commission's, I guess, decision match what the evidence was presented at the hearing?
Okay. Does that help?
Does that, I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, I don't know, but does that answer your question?
This to testimony. Well, that's, first, we've closed to testimony, and we are handling this as a standalone land use hearing. So, after all of, and I'll just kind of get us going a little more if there's anybody that wants to add anything or not. It just seems almost, it's very similar. It's precedent setting, and I don't like having to kind of clean up past issues. I don't know when they occurred. I can't speak to that. I haven't even lived here for more than 5 years. So I do think it's important that we are consistent as a commission and that these things transcend our time on the commission, our time as city attorneys, city managers, city planners, whatever it may be, and that they stand the test of time and that we are consistent across the board and we start setting a precedent for the big picture in the long range plan, not the minutiae and the individual. And yes, that does mean that there are going to be folks that get unintentionally put in bad, unfortunate situations through no fault of anybody's, either up here or that presented this evening or any other evening moving forward. And that's kind of where I feel we're unfortunately being put in a position to make a very difficult decision.
Just to play devil's advocate, what about since they've already offered to change the zoning on those other properties, does that set a precedent as well?
Well, we don't have that that's kind of tough to speak to, wouldn't you?
I would agree. I don't know
Yeah, we
anything
can't.
about that 2017.
Because that might even have been being mischaracterized. We don't know that for sure, so.
I'm just wondering.
I would hesitate to put anything
Speculate.
in our,
Yeah, well, it's
in
might
our
be speculative.
hearing.
I'm just wondering if that would come back to haunt us as well.
I think it's evidence that's out there, I mean, but obviously there's burden of proof and things like that if
Mhm.
they move
Okay.
forward.
Mayor, we do have the option to postpone this for more information.
I feel like we've gotten,
And so,
I mean, just
we've
from my
got- I know
perspective, we've gotten a lot
but
of
I meant
information.
for like what Mark was speaking to about, you know,
The motorhome thing.
yeah. I don't know. It was just a thought thrown
Right, I
out there
understand
that
what
we
you're
do
saying.
have that option.
Do.
I mean,
We're not
this
opening
is-
this up for questions, sir.
This is a tough,
It is a tough one.
I just want to say, so, as it stands now, that's why I asked Stephen earlier, the main issue is being able to sell the property, for a buyer to.
As a
get
residential
lent-
property.
Yeah, as residential.
Right.
But it's a non-conforming, so the way things are now shouldn't change if it's continued to be rented. I mean, the issue will be, Mr. Cooley won't be able to sell it as residential, and Mr. Trawick wouldn't be able to purchase it. But it
But
would
he could continue to
continue-
hypothetically rent it.
hypothetically continue to rent, like nothing changed.
If both parties were in agreement, and that's another.
Right, that's
Yeah,
not what
right,
we're
right,
deciding.
Right.
But I just want to, because, it's pulling at the heartstrings of all of us. But at the end of the day, it's basically, I mean, it's preventing him from purchasing the house.
Right.
But it's not preventing him from staying there currently.
That's the way I understand it.
The way, okay. I just wanted to kind of discuss, throw that out there. We're not kicking anyone out on the street. Office rent. To provide for a resident.
but then
Right.
the rest of them along there would still be the C2 with the residences in that area.
Okay.
This is a,
So I am going to go ahead and, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and close this to discussion.
well, let me just throw another thing out there about the conditional use. He said we do have the option of a conditional use, but I don't know that
But that
that'll help
wasn't
him
gonna
purchase
help
the
the-
property,
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
right?
That-
Is that correct? That's what I was
That's my
remembering,
That's what Stephen
yeah.
said.
So,
That they still wouldn't pass the loan test,
right. Since all the,
So-
yeah.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that
They've
that
gotten more
on
stringent.
itself.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to project,
Yeah. Well, that was.
VA lending is not, it's quite
Setbacks
strict.
and all that
I can speak from experience.
Yeah. Anyway.
Which is probably where this may have come from, but either way, that's not necessarily relevant, it's just kind of projecting. So I'm going to go ahead and close, leave this item A to discussion and entertain a motion. Somebody.
Well, it's written in the negative, and we need to make the motion in the positive. It's
it's
been
ready
our,
to move
it's,
to deny.
I know, it's written in the negative, but
So we would have to change the
We would
motion,
change the
and I'm
motion and
looking at our
vote
city attorney
accordingly.
and our city clerk, that we would have to move to approve, and if we wanted, move to approve the conditional use permit, that would be the correct motion. And then we would, if we wanted to approve it, we would vote aye, and if we didn't want to approve it, and we would vote against it. Is that?
Correct.
Okay. So I'll make sure we're all on the same page here. Okay, so is somebody prepared to kind of make that language change and make a motion?
Mayor, I move to approve zone change 19-04, a request from Jason Quigley for a zone change from the C2 General Commercial and Wholesale District to the O1 Office and Institutional District for property located at 100 Simmons Road, Aztec, New Mexico.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
second.
We have a motion and a second. Carl, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Snover,
Nay?
Mayor Pro Tem Wright,
No,
Commissioner Slack,
This is a tough one. Nay.
Commissioner Randall,
Nay.
Commissioner Lewis,
It is a tough one. Nay.
motion passes 5-0.
No, the motion,
Motion denied.
the motion denied, 5-0.
Right.
Okay. I don't really know what to say. That's a difficult one, and we all kind of knew that was coming. The next, I guess we have to move into the next land use item, which is item B. Please forgive me, let me get my agenda back in front of me. Quasi-judicial hearing, land use, item B, conditional use permit to allow for a church in a C1 district for property located at 222 North Main Avenue. Mr. Saavedra, are you going to speak to this one as well?
Mr. Mayor, City Commission, CUP 1902 is a conditional use permit request to allow a church in a C1 district. Now, before I get into the slideshow presentation, just quickly, C1 district does not allow churches by right. It doesn't say they're allowed, it doesn't say they're prohibited. So as a result of that, within our zoning code, they ask for any use that's not specifically mentioned to come before the commission as a conditional use permit. And that's why we're here today. Back in the fall of 2019, New Harvest Church was actually located on South Main Avenue, also in the commercial zone district. And at the time, there was a fire which forced them to relocate. As a result, this church relocated to 222 North Main Avenue. The community development was made aware of this primarily because the pastor of the church came in, was doing his research and decided to put up a sign. So he requested a sign permit. He came in, and at such time, we informed him that churches are not specifically allowed in a commercial zoning district. Now, if anybody was around back in 2000, 2001, the Planning and Zoning Commission, or former Planning and Zoning Commission, had dealt with a very similar issue, churches on Main Street. And at the time, there was an ordinance that was presented in the staff report where the city was proposing to ban or actually make it a little bit harder to have a church downtown. And at the time, the reason for that was, do churches negatively affect businesses? Do they negatively affect downtown? And as you can see, and there was some quite discussion. I imagine there was some contentious public meetings. In fact, spoken to the previous planner at the time, Eric Ani, and he shared to me some of the great stories that happened as a result of that. Nevertheless, the fact of the matter is, what was relevant 20 years ago is still relevant today. And the New Harvest Church is asking for a conditional use permit so that they can be in compliance with zoning district. So when we look at this particular piece of property, and this is a shot of it right now. This is actually located on 222 North Main Avenue. Previously, it was Aztec Finance, and it's actually located in a shopping center strip along Main Avenue. As you can see, it's 0.4 acres, but that's the parcel of property. The space is actually a little smaller than that. And here's the zoning district, C1. It's in our downtown, and it's actually in our MRA district, Metropolitan Redevelopment Area. As you can see with this purple line, purple arrow, it's right there. And the future land map of the MRA that examined our downtown area and examined this piece of property, believe that continuous of C1 commercial properties should continue along this area. Nothing has changed. So this is just to give you an idea of where it's at. These are some bird's eye views, whole property. Just to show you, there's Safeway right here. This is where there's Premier Fitness. This right here is the church. This is Blanco City Hall, not too far from where we're at right now. Another image just to show where we're at on the different side. This is a street view picture taken back in 2018, right there. That was Aztec Finance. That's where the church is at right now. So before I get into the recommendation, let's talk about it a little bit more. Let's understand where we're at in the context of C1 district, the MRA, and if this conditional use permit merits a good enough analysis to be granted, to be denied, to be tabled, or to be allowed with conditions. So I'm going to reference back to 2000, 2001, because those same issues are still present today. Does a church help downtown? So the argument may be that, well, it's better than nothing. If you don't have a church there, you're going to have a vacant space. And that's true. If there isn't a church there, you might have a vacant storefront. That's completely true. But what a church does, and this is nothing about a church, is, and this is not my opinion, this is evidence, this is fact. A church operational hours are limited to 1 or 2 days of a week. I believe New Harvest Church operation hours are Wednesday evening and Sunday. So by and large, this particular piece of storefront property is going to sit vacant. And why 2001 had some issues with churches downtown is having a church that's unoccupied most days of the week. Does that revamp our downtown? Does that help our downtown? Or does that make it look unoccupied, vacant, and possibly blighted? That was a question posed downtown. There is a potential that if a church sits there unoccupied for most days of the week, it's going to look vacant. That's a fact. Second, does a church influence other businesses around it? Potentially. Businesses that want to serve and sell alcohol have to get a waiver if they're located within 300 feet of a church. So it could influence alcohol sales. Now, granted, if somebody wants to sell alcohol and there's a church nearby, they can petition the commission for a waiver. So that business can still happen if a waiver is granted. But that's all dependent on that current commission at the time. The only other business I could think of that would not be allowed and a waiver cannot be granted would be a dispensary, for example. Medical marijuana dispensary, to be more precise. If a medical marijuana dispensary wanted to come in right there or right there, couldn't happen. Well, it couldn't happen anyways because you had a church right there. State doesn't offer any waivers for those type of businesses. But where one could is if it was more on North Main. That business could be negatively affected. So there is that potential. Now, will that happen? Don't know. What another thing a church may do is, just like our similar zoning case, is you take away potentially one commercial piece of property. So you take a space that was utilized for commercial and you change it over to a church. Now, does that help economic development? In reality is no. You cannot increase economic activity by taking away commercial property. So those have to be taken into consideration. At the same time, the question still remains, a church may not be optimal for a C1 district. It wasn't recommended in the MRA. However, it's still preferable to a vacant storefront. So going through this, outlined in the staff report, there's 4 suggested options. Approve the conditional use permit for the property, deny the conditional use permit for the church, approve with conditions, hence conditional use permit name, or table it. Now, EDAB has not weighed in on this. We haven't heard from anybody supporting it, denying it, anything of that nature prior to tonight. Aztec Chamber of Commerce hasn't weighed in, and the reason why is we haven't went to EDAB to give their perspective. But the concerns of the Planning and Zoning Board, or former Planning and Zoning Board, still remain today. A church can be a great thing for downtown. You'll see within cities that were first colonized by the Spanish hundreds of years ago, that's how cities were built. So just look at Santa Fe, look at Old Town. Cities were built around a church and then the plaza built around it. Now, the Spanish didn't come to this area, and that's why you don't see that plaza like you see in Santa Fe, like you see in Albuquerque. But you see it all over South America, Central America, Florida, and so forth. But right now, the question at hand is, if you allow a church, what could happen? Could it negatively influence business around it? Yes, there is that possibility. If it stays or it looks vacant most days, is that helping our downtown? Probably not. So within the report, there was some suggested conditions to try to thread that needle. If a church was to be approved, conditions were outlined, and one of the conditions is the church must have the lights on at all times, so that it doesn't look vacant, so that it shows that there is a presence there. As you can see in the photo, the church has put out flowers. If a conditional use was granted, we'd ask that those continue, so it shows that there is some life, some activity in this area. Liquor licenses, asking the church, if it comes before them, not to protest, because that's what downtowns are now trending towards, is tap rooms, breweries downtown. So we had asked that that doesn't negatively affect other businesses, because then that is business unfriendly. And of course, window signs would be in adherence to city code. So I understand the situation at hand. The church was forced to relocate from their original place because of the fire. They chose this place. Unfortunately, should have been a little bit more due diligence to make sure that the zoning was in conformity. It was not. Nevertheless, we caught it. And the reason why we catch it is so we don't have situations like we had in the previous zoning case, where things go by for years and years and years, and then someone catches it and makes a big deal out of it, and then trying to clean it up afterwards. So it's before you now, so with 4 suggested options, and with that, I will stand for questions.
I have a question, Mr. Cerveja. Do you require all businesses on Main Street to have their lights on 24 hours a day?
No.
And have you done because Speedway, or the gas station right there sells alcohol, right?
Correct.
And then Safeway across the street?
Safeway does.
Or is that within 300 foot?
Safeway is, yes.
So would that mean that if we were to grant this conditional use permit, Safeway would have to come before us hypothetically,
No.
or because it's already been,
It's already been established.
they've already been established?
Yeah, so they've already got their license.
They've already had it.
Right.
But if Safeway wasn't there, or another
Or
place
any
was
other
south,
business within
that
that?
becomes a situation. And so when we're looking at business, we're looking at economics, we're trying to become business friendly.
Right.
The question has to be asked, Safeway wasn't there, and there's a church here, and now Safeway is not allowed to sell alcohol, what does that do to their business? What does that do to the business community at hand? What does that do to GRT as a city as a whole? So those are, I mean, I know it's small and micro
Right,
for this
right.
one particular instance,
Right.
but these shouldn't be made on just this
Right.
business. It should be made as a city as a whole.
So the big picture is that, you know, it's not part of the MRA, and stop me if I'm wrong. So I don't want to just be speaking in, you know, but it's not part of the MRA, and it's not, I mean, your downtown areas traditionally, I mean, think of any downtowns that we go to visit, like kind of like a Main Avenue, Main Street type of strip or drag, whatever you want to call it, you know, the heart of the downtown. The closest would probably be, what, Durango maybe, that has that kind of setup with an older historic downtown type of thing. Maybe Farmington, on the west side of Farmington. To be able to lure the types of businesses that we're hoping to lure as far as tourist attractions, tap rooms, shops, things like that, potentially dispensaries in the future. That's another conversation for another time. That would prohibit any of those from even being able to, you know, either they would have to get a special use permit to put a restaurant that wanted to serve wine or beer or whatever, and it would completely prohibit anybody if they wanted to invest in a dispensary or anything like that. Is that a fair statement?
A dispensary, yes, that's 100% correct. And alcohol institution, I mean, it wouldn't be a special use or conditional use, it'd be a waiver.
Okay.
That, they would have to get that, and if that's not approved, that waiver is not granted, then those businesses would not be able to serve or sell.
And that could be dependent upon the makeup of the commission at the time.
Correct.
Hypothetically, you know, each business would have to come in individually and ask permission because of this one church that's located in this one particular area. So moving forward, hypothetically, if this lease were renewed for 5 years, 10 years from now, that any individual potential restaurateur or bar owner or whatever the case is, even event, maybe they wanted to have a catering place and have events or something like that, they would have to do that. Every individual business would have to request a waiver each and every time, come before commission to get that approved.
If they're selling and serving, yes, and so it
Right,
could even,
right.
it could even influence somebody that wants to cater an event with
Right.
alcohol. So, for example, if there was to have a wedding or a graduation, and there's gonna be alcohol catered by
Right.
Lacomb's or former St. Clair Winery, they would have to get that same waiver.
It
That
seems kind of
still
like
applies.
a bit of a ripple effect, potentially.
It is, and that's why these zoning cases should be taken serious. What you do now will have an impact, not
Have
just today,
ramifications in the future.
but a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I'm going to stress the MRA. It was important. We had, you know, that planning document for over a year and a half.
Which we approved.
Which we approved. Was your guiding document to say what can and what should not happen. And the reason why that's important, and you made some questions about could we get sued or could we do this? One of the questions that's always asked in land use is, was the decision arbitrary or capricious? Did you have facts to back up your decision? If you didn't, and you're just saying, hey, this one works because I like the property owner, but I don't like this one property owner, and so I'm not going to grant the conditional use because I go to St. Joseph's as opposed to this church, that's going to get you in legal trouble.
And that could transcend commissions as well. I mean, maybe it wasn't intended that way, but if you were to look at it, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that could also be perceived as capricious because maybe one set of commissioners felt one way and they allowed it to happen, and then another said, you know, maybe they were a different makeup and they said, no, we're not going to allow this to happen, and then they're like, well, how come? You know, it doesn't matter about the individual makeup, it's about the governing body itself. Is that fair?
Clarify something, MRA, that's the proposal in 2000 to.
No, it's the most recent, and we'll have an opportunity after Mr. Savage's finished, okay?
And it stands for the Metropolitan Redevelopment Area. That was adopted in 2018. The study started in 17 and went to 2018.
And this commission is the one that approved it.
That's correct.
I have one more question for you, Mr. Surveyor. You have some conditionals for some conditions for the CUP. Do you think that, and you're probably more up to date on this than I am, but do you think that you would be able to, in addition to waiving any issues with future liquor license, that if allowable by law, do you believe that you could put a condition on there that would subject them, or a condition that they could waive any medical marijuana dispensaries, recreational dispensaries?
That's part of the state statute.
But I'm just saying, I mean, if recreational marijuana becomes legal, and I'm assuming they're gonna regulate it and similar to the liquor license, when you get a liquor license and all that stuff, I'm just thinking that if allowable by law, just to solve the problem, you know, it may not be allowable by law now, but next legislative session.
Hypothetically, it could be.
Exactly.
But it could also maybe not be.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
So as it stands now, unless there is a change to the law, there would be no opportunity to waive that.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even want to speculate what the short session in the legislative body's going to do this time around.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
But as it stands right now, there's no waiver for those type of businesses. And so if that is if that is a concern of the commission, if you don't want those businesses downtown, then my recommendation would be you make it more strict. If you're looking to have businesses such as that or liquor establishments, then you probably don't want to do this because then you're putting more limitations and more regulations on it. So that's kind of where it stands right now. State has said they're going to grant no waivers, and this is from the Department of Health. So that's how we're going to proceed with that.
Does anybody have any other questions for Mr. Saavedra?
No.
One thing, and again, it's not, I know we're in Landa Manana and we like to get to things later. It is an option. EDAB has not weighed in. This is an economic development issue. If you take away commercial property, it does have a negative effect on the supply. It's just a supply and demand issue. There is the option to table it to hear what EDAB has to say if this current commission does not feel there's enough evidence at hand to make a decision. That being said, the staff report is presented. There were some suggested conditions. Those are only conditions that I put forward. This current commission is welcome to place their own conditions or no conditions at all. So those are just suggestions to try to thread that needle. I understand it's a tough situation. Church wants to be there. There is some benefits that a church economically brings. As if you have a gathering, you bring more people to downtown. So that is a benefit that should be recognized. But across the whole, the situation still remains, and that's why the conditions from community development were put on is if you're only operating 2 days of the week, then you're vacant or unoccupied most days. And what effect does that have on downtown? Hence the lights being turned on, flowers, things of that nature.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
I'm kind of wading through some of the, because the folks that signed up on the request to speak to commissioners, I think there was a little confusion, so, because we have one on the land use hearing form, but I think if it's okay, do you think it's, I mean, there are a couple of folks that signed up here, so I'm personally comfortable with letting them speak. Does anybody object to that, or is there any objection you think? Okay.
If you guys feel comfortable, you guys want to do that.
Okay. So with that said, I want to make sure we get kind of like top down, so to speak. I've got Mr. Is it Bost? I'm sorry.
I'll answer to either.
Is the actual property owner present?
She was here, but she was running out of oxygen, so she had.
Okay. And so we have Mr. Bost, Mr. Miera, and Mr. Payne. So Mr. Miera, what role do you have in this?
I'm an officer of the church.
Okay, so you're basically an interested person, I would say. And Mr. Payne, I'm sorry, who's Mr.? And you're also kind of a witness to this?
I'm the owner of next door, Premier Fitness.
Okay. All right, so we'll start, I guess we'll just kind of go down the line then. We'll start with Mr. Bost. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, for your time. I want to start by saying I do fully understand that we are here asking you guys to give us a variance to the law. By my own problem, my own not understanding what I needed to do, I wound up in this building without permission. We had been, as was stated before, at 207 South Main. And actually, I was in 207 South Main twice. We did speak to somebody down here, but that's that vague somebody, and it was back in the day when they just, yeah, you're okay, go ahead. And nobody said anything. So, and we do know her name was Michelle, but who she was or where, we don't know. So none of that really matters. I realize that we are standing outside the law and we're asking you for a variance to the law. And therefore, I thank you for your time to hear what we have to say. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Aztec. I grew up at 314 North Church Street in Aztec. This is my home. I've grown up here. I went off to Los Lunas for a little while, where I was ordained as a pastor with Calvary Chapel. Felt the call of God to come up here, and my call was to help this community, not to harm this community. I understand the reasons for not wanting a church. I understand the concern that a church can look vacant. However, if you look at the pictures taken of our church prior to our occupation in that church and taken of it after, you'll see that the church is in much better standing now than it was prior. And our intent is to keep it that way. We also, and I want to thank Mr. Saavedra too, he's been very, very helpful to me and very professional. And in talking with him, I've always hesitated. One of the ladies in my church is a painter. She likes to paint the windows. I've always hesitated because I've been under the impression that we couldn't do that without permits, and he told me, no, you just can't put signs up. You can put decoration up. So that's another thing that you would see coming, is that we would decorate the front of the church with paintings on the windows. As far as the economic hardship of having a church, I understand that because it's not a tax base for you. It doesn't provide you with a tax base. I do pull people in here from Flora Vista, from top of Crouch Mesa, from Farmington even. They come over and go to church here. They dine here, they buy fuel here, they go to the convenience stores here, and they do help the tax base of the city. As far as the conditional uses that were put forth by Mr. Saavedra, I have no problem with any of those. And if you wanted to put in there a conditional use that should the state allow it, that I wouldn't object to a recreational marijuana dispensary, I would have no problem with that. My calling as a pastor to God is to help people who are hurting, not to tell them, I don't want you by me. I do want them by me. I want to be there when they come out and they're hurting and they need somebody to talk to. That's the purpose behind my church. So I have no objection to any particular type of business. You will never see me object to a business going in beside me. That's not my goal. That's not where we are with this church. We did do, like I said, we actually were in our first building in January of 2012, and that was at 207 South Main. We were in that building for a little over 2 years, and then we moved down by Dr. Poe's office, and then we came back up to that building in 2016. The neighbors that we had there, the businesses that we had there, I've got letters here, and I'll give them to you guys if you want them, from Main Street Music, who was one of our neighbors across the street there. They're in support of us. I've got one here from Napa. They're in support of us. They talked with me a little bit. Their only concern was parking. Of course, we don't do a whole lot when they're open, so they're in support of us as well. I also have a letter here from our landlord, and I'll give these to you guys.
Thanks. Thank you.
So we do have some support within the community, and it is fully our goal to be supportive, proactive members of this community. Excuse me. Some of the things we do, we have a clothing drive where we give out clothing every year. This past year, we gave out 120 trash bags full of clothes to people who need clothes for their children. And pretty much everybody in the county knows about it. It happens the weekend before school starts every year, and they plan on it. And it's something that we do to reach out to the community. We also participate in the Safe Treats on Main Street. We put all of our candy in bags when we give it to the kids, and we can kind of divide it up. We gave out over 1,000 of them this year. We were still giving out candy when almost every business in town had quit because they had run out. When the city was doing, or the chamber was doing the Fourth Friday, for those of you who remember that, where the businesses stayed open on Friday nights, we were open every night of the Fourth Friday doing. We did a coffee and hot chocolate and pastries and live music for people to come in. Every nighttime parade, I won't say every parade, I love Aztec. I grew up in Aztec, I love Aztec. This is the parade-havingest town I've ever seen in my life, so I don't make every parade. But most of the parades, and especially the nighttime parades, we have our doors open, we give out coffee, we give out hot chocolate, we give out cookies. It is our goal to minister to and be a part of this community. We have tried very hard to be active, productive members of this community, to bring a positive benefit to this community and not be a draw on this community. And it's our goal going forward to do that as well, to be a productive part of this community. So I have nothing else unless you have questions for me, but I do thank you once again for your time.
Mayor Pro Tem?
What's the size of your membership?
Right now, my membership's between 20 and 25 people.
Okay. And do you have a lease on this building?
Yes.
Okay. And what period of time is it?
The lease was for 1 year at this point, and then we have the option to renew the lease at that point.
Okay. When did it start?
It started in September.
Okay. And have you, knowing this situation, have you looked for other properties? Have you seen other places that could be appropriate?
I will be honest with you, at this point, with that building blowing up like it did and us moving, it drained my bank account to the point that I don't have the finances to rent another building at this point. So no, in direct answer to your question, no, I have not.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I don't know.
No? No. Well said.
Mr. Boast? Okay. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Staff, anybody want to ask any questions? Mr. Saavedra?
It wasn't said earlier, but in most zoning districts for a church, a conditional use permit is required. So the question was asked if you looked at other businesses. There's a good chance that even if you were to say, okay, not this one, there would still have to be some permit
Right.
issued if it's residential or commercial.
Okay.
So, I commend the pastor that he's going through the process, he's going through the steps. Again, I'm not sure if he wants to be here on a Tuesday night, Tuesday evening, but.
I want to
mean,
be legal. I want to
So
be legal.
that would have to happen regardless. And so if he was to go to a different location, let's say in a residential, the zoning code specifically states a CUP is required.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, Mr. Miata?
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for hearing us. Much in reiteration of what Pastor Bost said, a church is also, and even according to the city bylaws, a business that has spiritual applications, but a business nonetheless. And we were located on Main Avenue originally there, next to the bank, and then we moved after a couple of years to a different position. It was off of Main Street there next to Dr. Poe's office. And it actually hurt our business in the sense that we lost pretty much all visibility. So it's actually why we moved back to Main Avenue. We moved back into that property at 207 South. And we're perfectly happy with that until it blew up. Or at least the apartments around the other side. So in the reason why we're wanting to stay on Main and addressing that, is there another business, is there another location that could suit the needs of that particular tenant or business? And I think in this instance, it's our intention to be on Main because we want to be relevant. We want to be a part of the community. My wife and I are both very active with Farmington's downtown district and trying to build up the presence of the downtown, which, as you're probably familiar, they're doing a lot. And we just really feel like building up the downtown is vital. It's either lives or dies. And we're at a vital point as a community to say we want the downtown area to grow. And so that's part of our vision as a church as well, is to see the downtown area growing, to see people there, drawing their attention and their money as well. Not for us, but for the other businesses. And we also, as Mr. Saavedra said, it would be irrelevant as a downtown or an on the Main Avenue location if we were only doing business 4 hours a week or something like that. But we are there on Friday nights, we're there on family nights, we're there Sundays, we have special events. We're over at Minium Park with a permit, doing hot dog roasts in the summer. As Mr. Boss said, we're out there for the parades, we're out there for everything that happens downtown. We're there as much as we can be. And so as our intention is to be contributory to the downtown district. And I feel like we, not only the intention to do that, but our actions do that. Certainly as we grow, we have more opportunity to do that, and that's kind of a goal of ours. Our own growth is our goal, as well as the city's growth. And that's it.
Does anybody have any questions? Mr. Miata?
I don't.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Payne?
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Ryan Payne. I own Premier Fitness right next door to Harvest. And I'm here to support them 100%. I have no problem with them being next to me. We have limited parking, but it works out perfectly because my attendance at my gym is very little on Sundays. And it doesn't negatively impact me at all. In fact, I love having a small church next to me. It's very relevant to have a small church in a downtown. I personally came to Christ and
was part of a small church at the University District down in downtown in Seattle. So a church does have an impact in a main downtown corridor. So I just want to put my support in there. And the office space was empty for 9 months, a little over 9 months, before they came in, and the office space next to me has been empty for 4 years, at least. So I think it will build up downtown rather than do anything to negatively impact. So thank you for your time.
Sure. Okay, that's it as far as folks that have signed up to speak on behalf of this land use item. So I will go ahead and close this to testimony and open it up for discussion amongst the commission.
I'll jump out there first.
Okay.
I personally don't see that there's any negative impact for them being there. We've, in the conditional use, they've said that, you know, the church wouldn't object to any future liquor licenses, which possibly could go in. I mean, there's a lot of ifs. And, I mean, they were on Main Street until the fire and the explosion and all that. So I just don't see any, I don't see that it's gonna cause a problem for a conditional use permit for them to stay there.
Would that stand up to legal scrutiny? If the conditional use permit states that they agree
To not object to a liquor license?
Right.
I think that would.
Okay.
I mean, it's a condition to the granting of the conditional use permit.
Right. Anybody else?
And it's better than it being vacant,
Absolutely.
so.
I mean, I think it's great, and I honestly don't think, personally, that we should be in the practice of putting a whole bunch of conditions on it either. Like, I would be fine with just approving it. And honestly, if it does, I mean, we're gonna make them leave the lights on, we're gonna make them leave the plants. I mean, I understand if they don't have an issue with it, but I have an issue with requiring them to, I guess is the
'Cause they
heartburn
don't,
I've had
'cause
over it.
like-
Because I've been over this, you know, in preparing for the meeting, and I just don't think that's right on our part.
Because we don't
So you
have
can-
business.
You can't have an issue with any alcohol sales, you need to leave your lights on, you need to leave plants on. I don't think we need to be the ones with these conditions. And honestly, with the conversation earlier, because we keep getting hung up on bars and dispensaries and the types of businesses we want coming to Aztec. I didn't know anything about the dispensary, no waivers. That makes me want to put them in there even more, personally, because I wouldn't want to make dispensaries on Main Street, personally. But that's just me. I just don't think, I mean, I'm fine with approving it, I just don't think we should even put any conditions on it, in my opinion. I know that's just me.
Commissioner Lewis? I mean, I just want to give other folks an opportunity, because I would like to weigh in a little bit.
Well, I appreciate what they want to do. I do approve of the conditions, however. I'd like to know more about what effect it might have on a dispensary. I mean, how far effective? I mean, it certainly can't affect all of Main Street, right? Is that, am I mistaken here? I don't know.
It's the same, I mean, I don't know, it's still the 300 feet, but, and the condition the situation that exists now is if like, say, 550 wanted to move next door to Premier Fitness, just use that as a hypothetical, and they would have to get permission they would have to get a waiver to operate out of there because they're within 300 feet of the church. If 550, the owners of 550, and I'm just using this totally hypothetically, or say I wanted to, or another, you know, John Doe investor, we'll use that just to keep it, you know, totally, you know, non-biased, wanted to put a dispensary there, they are not allowed in any form or fashion under current state law. No waivers allowed, nothing can be.
Within 300 feet?
Within 300 feet.
Okay.
So just in case a bar or dispensary wants to go in, maybe sometime in the future, we shouldn't let this church be there, because we might have someone come in that wants to be within 300
My
feet.
thought process is that, again, kind of like we were talking about in the last one, with the last land use, is that we absolutely need to think about those eventualities. And if we're not, I think we're not doing our job. we have to consider what is the long-term benefit potential for the city, and does this fit into the long-term benefit with the types of businesses that are traditionally on a main avenue in a downtown area. And I think that this does add another hurdle unnecessarily to a potential business owner or entrepreneur that wants to open a business. And then we're putting the onus on every other business owner. So this one kind of is kind of like the hub on the wheel, so to speak, and then it radiates out. So anybody that's within 300 feet of that they're the ones that have the onus of coming and getting a waiver instead of the other way around.
Only for bars and dispensaries, though.
And, right, and the MRA that we approved doesn't include that as an economic benefit to our downtown area. So, I mean, we went through that whole process. It was kind of overlapping the election in 2018, because I remember going to some of the things as a private citizen, and then again as an elected official, and then we, as a commission, unanimously approved that MRA. And again, I'm going to defer back to something Mr. Saavedra said. We have to look at the big picture, not just that one kind of individual use that we're being presented with, because there could be 10 more, hypothetically. Maybe not. There may never be another one. We don't know that. There may never be a dispensary owner that wants to come into Aztec. Who knows? Or a bar owner. We don't know that. But couldn't we have said the same thing about 550? You know, that's a we could have said the same thing 4 years ago, that, no, we're never going to do that. We're never going to have Sunday alcohol sales. Well, we're on the cusp of potentially having that. So I think it's our responsibility to transcend our own personal opinions and to look at the health and future welfare of this as a vibrant, thriving downtown area. And whether we agree with it or not, a lot of thriving downtown areas, those places are draws for people that want to come into town. They want to go and have a drink and watch a game. They want to have a burger and get a local beer, something like that. It's just the way, that's what we do. And I think to add an unnecessary hurdle is short-sighted of us. It has nothing to do with supporting church or religions or anything like that. It's just kind of the economics of it and the long-term vision of what we have agreed to for our city as a commission. And that's kind of my, well, more than 2 cents of it, I guess.
I have to disagree, because even though we did the MRA, you know, and I still think that's a great plan. I'm not saying that it's not anything like that, but, I mean, these businesses right here in this little strip mall right here, those buildings have been empty for years and years. And to have somebody actually in there and it looking like somebody cares about it and is taking care of it. And there's a lot of towns that have churches on their main streets. A lot of little towns have churches on their main streets. And I disagree that we're gonna we possibly could prevent somebody from coming in and doing recreational marijuana or whatever, you know. I think it's great to have the building filled, and they've got it looking like something's there. And, I mean, you could go a long time. Who knows how long it would stay vacant if they're not in there.
They're obviously very much interested in being part of the community
Yes.
and bringing people in, and it's
I would
a
like to know
win-win.
what EDAB would consider. I'd be interested in tabling it and putting it in before EDAB, as Mr. Saavedra talked about. This is an economic development issue in the downtown area, and I'd really like I'd be interested in that.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Personally, I don't think it's necessary, but.
Yeah.
I'd go along with that, though.
I'm sorry?
I said I would go along with that as well.
Okay, we have a little bit of a split here, so I'm going to ask somebody to make a motion on one of these options.
Mayor, I move to
Well,
approve.
I'm sorry, before I do that, I need to close it to discussion. I need to close this item quasi judicial land use hearing to discussion and entertain a motion on one of these options. So we need to, and, you know, just keeping in mind that if, you know, are we allowed, we can also present another option as well.
Correct.
Right,
So-
I mean, you can vary in that conditions to do it. Right.
Okay.
Well,
Mayor, I'd move to approve CUP 19-02, a request from Denny Boss for a conditional use permit to allow a church in the C1 district at 222 North Main Avenue.
without the conditions, you're doing without conditions?
Correct.
Okay.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Caller, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Snover,
Nay.
Mayor Pro Tem Fry,
Nay.
Commissioner Sykes,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis,
Nay.
Commissioner Randall,
Aye.
motion denied, 3-1.
3-2.
3-2, 3-2.
Okay, so. there's-
Now you
yeah,
can make
that's it.
another motion.
Okay. Is anybody inclined to make another motion? Hearing none.
I'll do it because I think it's important if it's going to go before EDAB and then come back to us, at least that gives them another opportunity.
It's your prerogative.
I'm going to move to table this conditional use permit for the church until we have a chance to discuss it with the Economic Development Advisory Board.
I second it.
You good, Carla?
Mayor Snover,
No, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure you were good with the motion. You had it. Okay? Sure. You good? Okay. Carla, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Snover,
Nay.
Mayor Pro Tem Fry,
Yes.
Commissioner Sykes,
Aye.
Commissioner Randall,
Nay.
and Commissioner Lewis.
Aye.
So the motion passes, and my pen quit writing.
3-2. Yeah. Okay. All right. I need to make sure I wrap this up properly. Okay, so that is the end of our quasi judicial hearings. Thank you all for enduring that. We are now to item 11, Commissioner, City Manager, and Department reports. Start with Mr. Mueller.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had a couple of great comments over the last couple of weeks in reference to the street sweeping that's going on, so I want to give a kudos to the street sweeper operator in the Public Works Department, Gerald Gabehart, doing a great job and getting a lot of comments on it. Attended my first Chamber of Commerce meeting this morning out of Presidential Inn and Suites. They are just now getting their feet back under them, getting organized, trying to move forward. So I think that's going to be a great thing for the city. I'll be in Gallup tomorrow for the Northwest COG meeting and be down there pretty much all day. And then next week on Thursday, I will be in Albuquerque for the Veteran Safety Council training that helps us save on the insurance dividend.
Yeah.
So that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Mr. Garland?
Just to be brief, last week I did go to Albuquerque for the Children Law Institute Abuse and Neglect, continuing legal education for me, but it was more for other employees of the state. I would just encourage everybody in the community and on the commission, please support victims of domestic violence and child abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse. It's an epidemic in our community.
Thanks, sir. Commissioner Syed?
Just a couple things. I have EDAB coming up on Thursday, so hopefully we'll have a quorum and we can discuss some of these things. MPO is on January 23rd coming up, and I have a Northwest New Mexico Seniors Executive Board meeting on the 24th. So that's, and again, just, I think the city looked awesome through the Christmas holiday. I'd like to, too bad we can't leave them up all year. But anyway, everybody in the whole city did a great job, and the city employees and all the ones that helped get the city decorated. Once again, they did a great job. So that's it. Thank you.
Commissioner Lewis?
Actually, I don't have any report, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I'm going to quickly move on before you change your mind. Commissioner Randall?
We did not have a largest text board meeting this month. It's been postponed, I believe, till next month. I did attend the library board meeting last week, and a very good discussion was had with the board and Angela, and kind of the reason, I never really had thought about it before, the reasoning behind boards and giving her the support and guidance that, she needs in her position. So it was a really good discussion.
Very
Glad
good.
I'm on it.
Great. And Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, I went to San Juan County Partnership Board meeting. It was a general business meeting and plans to review their audit. And March 1st, they will be putting in a new director. I'm not free to announce the name of that person yet, but Pamela Drake will be retiring. She'll stay on through the training period, but big shoes to fill, and it was a challenge finding somebody qualified to replace Pamela. I went to the Economic Forum at San Juan College with financial experts that were quite interesting. They gave us a lot of data that so many of us know about this area and the general problem with unemployment and concerns about the closing of the San Juan generating station. They did mention the coming of a recession and didn't think it would happen this year, but said it will happen. That wasn't too heartwarming. And talked a lot about the boom down in Lee and Eddy counties, and the money that's being made, the oil produced, is helping the entire state, because there's some funds to be shared. I also went to San Juan Save Communities Initiative. An excellent report was done by Tracy Neff of the county. They have just gotten HUD money for homeless youth from ages 18 to 24. If you know anybody in that situation, it's an excellent program. You can call Tracy at the county and get filled in on what would be required to provide housing for those young folks. Sounds like an excellent program. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and be very brief. It's been a long night. Thank you for hanging in there with us. I have an echo. Both of my boards are meeting next week. The Airport Advisory Board is due to meet Monday, the 21st. Is that right? 20th? It's next week. I'm sorry. And then I have an Echo board meeting on Wednesday. And I just want to wish luck a couple of folks I know that I think registered or to file to run for City Commission in March. We've got a few of them here. Just want to wish them good luck. And it should be interesting. And I will be absent for next commission meeting on the 28th. I'll be out of town in Washington, D.C. for a few days, so it's just the way it's kind of a last-minute trip that I found out the other day. So it has been canceled. Okay, so I'm going to our Echo board. And I think that's right, because we're reconvening in April. That's right, I apologize. With that said, that's all I have. Are there any department head reports? Seeing none, I would move to adjourn.
So moved.
Greek. Oh, me too.
Oh my God. My feet are going to sleep. We'll see you guys. Have a good evening.
You too.